Shalom, shalom. Thank you very much for coming. It is a great pleasure to be with you. I'm Ilya Stambler, chairman of VETEC Association, the Movement for Longevity and Quality of Life in Israel, which co-organized this conference together with Cryonics Association, with Kfir Levi and Yishai Shemesh, who are the driving force behind this conference. I'm very happy that we were able to bravely open this topic in Israel. That's in fact the first openly thematical conference on cryonics in Israel. We're just saying it, whatever it's called, cryonics, biostasis. We are raising this topic, and hopefully this topic will be advanced here and in cooperation with other countries, because that's one of the important angles for advancing health and longevity research, development, and education that we promote also as VETEC Association. That is one of our community conferences that we hold once in a while. And our big conference, I have to make this announcement, is on October 28, 29. So without further ado, I had to tell my introduction, and I pass the command to Kfir, who will handle this from now on. Thank you, Kfir. Go ahead.
Julia. Hello, everyone. I would just like to ask first if at least one of you can put a thumbs up or indicate that you can all hear me, that everything is technically correct. Wonderful. Thank you, Dennis. Thank you. I appreciate it. Okay. All right. So ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to welcome you all to the first conference being held in Israel on the subject of cryonics. This is a very exciting day for us, and we've been planning it for quite some time. And I'm really glad to see all of you here. I will first introduce myself. My name is Kfir Levi, and together with my associate Yishai Shemesh, we established 3 years ago what is now known as the Phoenix Cryonics Association. Our goal is to promote the field of cryonics in Israel, to raise public awareness of this technology and its possibility, establish active collaborations with major international players in this field, and most importantly, to form an Israeli first response team so that every Israeli person living here can enjoy the service and have practical access to it. As part of our journey, Yishai and myself have been reaching out to various organizations around the world, primarily in Europe and the USA, in hope that we can learn from them and harness their experience in order to establish cryonics as a valid, scientific, real-world discipline here in Israel, and to gain the necessary understanding and support required for making Israel cryonics friendly. This conference today is currently the culmination of these efforts. Thanks to the extremely generous encouragement and support of Dr. Ilya Stambler and the VETEC Association, we decided to bring our efforts out into the world and to invite you all to listen to our esteemed speakers and to learn about the subject. I'm sure all of you have many questions, such as what is cryonics? How it came about? Why it is significant? How viable is cryonic preservation? How feasible is the possibility of reanimation in the future? And so on. We are here today to answer all these questions and much more. We have a full list of distinguished speakers who will be joining us, some from the United States, some from Europe, and some here in Tel Aviv, to share with you from their experience, from their own understanding of cryonics, from their experience as leaders of the world's best and foremost cryonic organizations, and from their vision of where this field will take us in the coming years, and decades. So, without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first speaker. Our first speaker is Dennis Kowalski of the Cryonics Institute, CI, in the USA. Dennis has served as the Cryonics Institute president for 20 years and is also a retired firefighter and paramedic. He is certified in advanced cardiac life support and has spent many years teaching emergency medicine. As a paramedic, Dennis has had a lot of experience dealing with life and death, as well as experience in running cryonics standbys. His specialized experience and training has allowed him to bridge conventional emergency medicine and cryonics. He's happily married to his wife and has a family of 3 boys, also paramedics, and signed up for cryonics. Dennis's goals are to continue seeing growth and stability in this science. In particular, he wants to see more local support groups developed worldwide to promote unity, outreach, and basic emergency response initiatives. As someone dedicated to helping others, he sees advancements in these technologies as the logical conclusion to the quest for prosperity and longevity for all. So, without further ado, Dennis, the floor is yours. Let me just verify that all of us can hear you. Please go ahead.
Hello, and thank you for that generous introduction. Shalom, everybody. I'm very grateful that you've invited me to this conference. And so I've written down some notes, and it's not really a formal talk, but I'm just going to hit on some important topics that I think are important for people like yourself starting new groups all over the world to know. And I'd like to just get that information out there, and I'll be happy to help you guys. So I'll begin with, I don't know how many people are joining us that are not as experienced in cryonics, but I'll begin with what cryonics is. I like to say, coming from my background, that cryonics is an extended cardiac arrest code. You know, it's the cardiac arrest code where when everyone else normally has given up, we keep going, we keep trying. And we're extended cardiac arrest code using extreme form of therapeutic hypothermia. So you'll even see that more recently in traditional emergency medicine, they're starting to cool people down for people who've had heart attacks or cerebral vascular accidents or strokes, for instance. And they're finding that sometimes rather than trying to speed up the metabolic process by adding oxygen and blood products, maybe slowing down and allowing the body to repair itself, right? And buying themselves time for other things such as surgery or more advanced interventions. So we're in the spirit of that, we're doing the same thing. We're slowing down time. We're buying ourselves a lot more time and enough time for the future to advance. So we're an ambulance ride to the future. So many of us also have, me for one, I'm wishing that somebody technologically will figure out some magic pill or potion or something that we can do to extend our lives through longevity, right? So that we don't need cryonics. I'd love to be put out of business. But it always seems that technology is always, another 5, 10 years, maybe 20 years down the road. And for some of us, time runs out. So if you're into longevity, I think the most logical backup plan is cryonics. So what does cryonics look like? What does a successful cryonics case look like? So I would say it begins all with pre-planning. Like it begins with these local groups, this grassroots movements like yourselves. It begins with logically figuring out what could go wrong, what could go right, and let's learn from our mistakes in the past, and let's learn from our successes in the past. So one of the first things that would, is most important we found is emergency notification. So it's important that people are sociable, that they're not, I found that some of the people in the cryonics community can be kind of introverted and logical minded, and maybe they don't have the same social networks out there. So it's very important to not keep your cryonics wishes to yourself. It is important to come out and talk about cryonics and to make it not such a stigmatization, so it's important to get out there. What else? Wearables. Like I wear a bracelet like this. I have a card in my wallet. I have a necklace. I have an app. I have an app on my phone, right? I don't know if you can see my phone. I've got an app that just works as a basic alarm system. When I'm not around people being sociable, when I'm all by myself, maybe on vacation or up north, this alarm system will go off and check on me. And if I don't hit it's a passive alarm. If I don't hit the alarm to notify my phone that I'm still alive and here and doing fine, then it'll send out messages to my family and friends or my neighbors, and they'll check on me. And then the extreme step would be calling 911 or whatever your emergency service is to try to intervene and save my life. And ultimately, if I am legally dead, then start the SST process. SST meaning standby stabilization and transport. So I'd like to break that down into two further layers or groups. There is local standby, and then there's remote standby. Local standby is anything that you must have at a local scene. And remote standby would be something like a more professional group or with an ambulance and with equipment and maybe a cardiac thumper and medications on site. But that's not to dismiss the importance of the most basic local level standby. I think both layers are incredibly important. And I'm not just saying this, I'm like trying to reinvent the wheel. I'm going by conventional regular medicine, right? The American Heart Association, for instance, and the Red Cross have realized that it's important to train lay people in CPR. So if your neighbor happens to be a plumber, but he knows how to do CPR, that guy could save your life faster than a cardiac surgeon who happens to be 7 hours away, because it's all about logistics. So they can get you to CPR, which will get you to the ambulance and get you to that cardiac surgeon who maybe can place a stent later and save your life. So emergency notification, standby, local and remote, 2 layers, right? Also, I look at basic versus field cryoprotectants or preservation. So basic would be just getting you CPR, getting you on ice, getting some anticoagulants in your blood. And if you're close, rushing you to the Cryonics Institute, for instance, or your cryonics provider of choice, so that they can push the cryoprotectants in and start the deep freeze process. But typically, it's always been that if you're overseas, there's a much greater probability that you're going to get what's called a straight freeze. So now some of our sister organizations out there, some of our good partners have been proposing field cryoprotectants. So Cryonics Institute's been teaming up with some of these people and offering that as a la carte option, a very good option, to make sure that the person is stabilized. So you go from early notification, SST, hopefully get field cryopreservation, then quick transport to your cryonics provider like the Cryonics Institute, shipping for the long-term storage. That's what a good cryopreservation looks like. Everything moves quickly, everything has been pre-planned, and everything's been thought out in advance. That's kind of where CI comes in that we're one of the most affordable options out there. We're extremely price competitive. We have a couple of key features is the price, and you know, the very fact that we are so low cost, and so a lot of the expense in the cost is for other organizations is the built-in standby fees, and it's kind of all comprehensive. For us at the Cryonics Institute, it's a little bit more of an a la carte option, and the reason we choose to go around that method is because we like to allow for a specialization or specific to your situation, wherever you live. You want to make sure that that money is there for you to set up your own local standby, and shop out whatever option in a remote standby works best for you. It's just kind of a common sense thing for us. Another benefit to the Cryonics Institute is our long-term historical track record. We've been doing this for over 45 years, going back to the start of Professor Robert Ettinger, who pretty much started the whole cryonics movement. And I'll try to get into a little bit of the history of the Cryonics Institute. It started with Professor Robert Ettinger. Little history on him. That gentleman goes back. He fought in World War II as a hero. He actually has a Jewish heritage, and he fought the Nazis in the Battle of the Bulge. There he sustained injuries where he lost his lower legs that were blown off, but because of advancements in technology, they were able to reattach his legs through bone grafts. And that was, I think, the start of, in Robert's mind, the start of, boy, what, this is stuff that was impossible decades ago, and now they were able to save my legs. Well, what's going to be possible in the future? Where is this trend heading? Where is this trend taking us? Where is the technology taking us? Right? And so then he got into science fiction and writing and so forth. And he wrote, he was reading about a couple stories that kind of hinted of cryonics. One was about a guy who got frozen in space or something like that. And as a physics professor, he wanted to test that theory and take it as far as it would go. And he asked, is this possible? Could we actually do this? So he applied all of his advanced learning and physics and his degrees and his understanding of chemistry and physics, and he ended up writing a book called The Prospect of Immortality, which I read and a lot of us read, and kind of got us interested in the whole concept of cryonics. And then he founded the Cryonics Institute based on the fact that he thought that others were going to do the work, and but nobody was, stepped up to the plate. And it's one of these things. Sometimes you want something done right, you got to do it yourself. So, anyways, Robert started the Cryonics Institute, and starting with the family. His first patient was his mother, and we've some of the key aspects of the Cryonics Institute have been to keep everything inexpensive and not for profit. I personally don't think there's any huge money to be made in cryonics. Maybe in the insurance side of things, maybe in some other areas that I'll talk about. But the cryonics itself is very labor intensive and very expensive. Your heart really has to be in it. It's a building of your own life raft for you and your family, and it's going to, more than anything, it's not going to make you money. It's going to cost you money. It's not going to be this grand thing where you become famous. It's going to take a lot of your time, and but it is a labor of love, is what it comes down to. And I'm sharing this with you because I think this is something that a lot of the local groups out there, they've experienced. They come in with a lot of enthusiasm and think that this is going to be easy, and they find out that it's a lot of work, and if you want things done right, you got to do them yourself sometimes. Well, what's important though with the Cryonics Institute is the money that you save it allows you to kind of customize your SST. It allows, I believe, for the people locally in Israel to the money saved could go towards equipment, cardiac thumpers, drugs, medications, training, and so forth at a local level. And also from the a la carte option, it can be used for signing up with organizations like Suspended Animation, uh, organizations like ICE, International Cryonics Medics, and so forth. And so the Cryonics Institute has been going around, has been doing this for a long time. And I think for overseas, it just makes sense. So I won't I won't go on and on about the Cryonics Institute, but if people are interested, they can look at our website, cryonics.org, and learn about that. But the last thing I want to really talk about is how this applies to local groups, in particular, the Israeli group. So some people, they talk about, what do we do? Where do we go from here? And, so I say, well, what are the main reasons for a local group? It's largely it's camaraderie, right? It's building unity and teamwork amongst different organizations and different people, but people with a common mission and a common goal. It's also about public outreach. It's about educating others who maybe haven't heard of cryonics, or they've got some weird misconceptions about what cryonics is. And then most importantly, it's about saving our own hides, our own SST, our own standby at that local level, like I was talking about. So it's kind of like a three-phase type of situation. And so it's important to look at the long-term storage as something maybe later down the road. I always say I don't think it's wise to put the cart before the horse. The first thing that everyone needs, and this is the analogy I like to use. I'm glad that there's multiple long-term storage facilities out there because especially in different regions of the world, logistically. But if you get too many organizations, it kind of ruins economies of scale. In so much as, let's say in the United States, we had 10 organizations and 100 people in suspension. So now you've got that overhead of 10 different facilities and 10 different groups of people doing the same thing. You kind of lose some scales of economy. But it's the opposite for standby, where you want things to be decentralized. Decentralized in so much as you look at a conventional emergency medicine, you have different tiers, you have different fire departments, you have different ambulance companies all over the world. And then the larger the city, the more advanced, the more rural the area, the more volunteer it becomes or becomes paid on call, and the resources kind of trickle down. And there's a reason the system works that way. You just don't have enough doctors and hospitals to go around to have one on every corner in every block. So you set up kind of a network and you try to spread and decentralize the standby. So what the most important thing for the local groups is to set up that local standby. And then if you're running a lot of patients through over a period of time, then it might make sense to set up the long-term storage, which is going to, again, cost a lot of money, and it's going to take a lot of work, hard work, and a lot of time. So the first thing to do is to perfect the local standby and to perfect that side of the coin. Yeah. So another thought out there, I'm going to be a little contrarian, is that the growth side of things, it's like the thought is that we just need to grow. That's all we need to do in cryonics is grow. We need to get bigger and more money. Well, certainly more money helps, but the thing about growth is I think growth needs to be stable, like a steady growth. You can't grow too quick. And my thought is, and where I kind of changed my mind on that a little bit, was when the whole COVID thing hit. And I started to see, not just with cryonics, but with trying to get parts for a car or certain parts at home, supply chains kind of were stressed. And it made me think about cryonics. And I started thinking about every possible supply chain thing that could go wrong in the long term. And I thought, boy, what would happen if we suddenly didn't have suppliers of liquid nitrogen or suppliers of the cryostats? Because I like to have like at least triple redundancy in all those things. And so I'll get into my ideas about that. But my thought is that we need to, going forward in the future, and this is where I'm talking about the future, is we have to think about the infrastructure of cryonics and the self-sustaining vertical integration, for all the cryonics organizations and for all the standby groups. So how I see that is let's say the cryonics community invested in some sort of a cryostat building, the actual manufacturing of cryostats, and not necessarily for cryonics, because a lot of DWARs and cryostats can be used by the hospitals and research groups, and maybe that would be the bulk of the business, but you'd still have the capability for spinning up and doing larger projects for cryonics organizations. Another example would be standby. So imagine instead of having a standalone cryonics company that does just standby, but instead they do ambulance services. 99% of their work is ambulance services. But the vertical integration side of things is they've always got one ambulance and one team and one set of equipment ready for cryonics in that local area. So it's a self-sustaining, money-making operation. When I said that cryonics doesn't make money, maybe the long-term storage doesn't, but maybe the vertical integration side of things would. So you look at other things like hospice care, you look at maybe handyman services, plumbing, electrical. These are all services that we've needed at the cryonics organizations. How about as we expand and get new buildings, storage buildings for storage for other companies on leases up to a certain amount of time. And then as we grow, we convert that to cryonics long-term storage. Again, that's just an example of how the system could pay for itself. I look at liquid nitrogen, maybe we wouldn't get into the manufacture of it, but maybe the distribution. You look at labor pools, you look at funeral homes, nursing homes. Of course, I wouldn't want to see any one cryonics group or provider doing all these things. It'd be quite the mission creep, but maybe like an overseeing group that was funding these things and allowing these things to run themselves. Just an idea. Nursing homes, the idea for early notification as an app for a phone, an app that notifies you when a person isn't moving or hasn't responded after a certain amount of time. You don't have to just market and sell that to cryonicists. That would be probably something that you'd want to market and sell to just elderly people or people who are sick or ill in the first place. And I think taking that broader approach might be the real growth in cryonics, rather than just trying to grow cryonics itself, growing the vertical integration side of things. So that's what I see for the future. It's just me spitballing off the top of my head and these discussions that I've had with my friends, and it's eye openers that I want people to start thinking in those directions. But in the meantime, the Cryonics Institute is there doing the best we can with what we got. And when I see, new organizations like you guys out there, I say, utilize us, use us every bit as you can, save money, and use us and learn from us and learn from all the Cryonics organizations out there, learn from all the standby organizations, and keep up the good work, keep doing what you're doing, and we'll be there to support you to the best of our abilities. And that's all I have, unless anyone has any questions for me. I'd be willing to answer questions, but
Thank you, Dennis, so much
yeah.
for these kind words and for everything that you said. I'll take some questions, but I'd like to ask one thing of you, if that's okay. Would you be able to tell us a little bit about how over the years you were able to bridge between public conception of cryonics as something perhaps in some people's minds bordering on science fiction and the actual practicality of the work that you guys are doing in actually preserving people and giving them hope and a vision for the future? How have you been able to bridge this gap between what is conceived as unreal sometimes and your daily work?
Well, it's tough because you can't always bridge it like that, but you try to remind people of a lot of things. I remind people that heart transplants and liver transplants, they were science fiction at one point until they weren't, so and a lot of the same negative feedback or stereotypical stigmatization was, you know, um, well, you're playing God, or, it's not meant to be, or um, what else? Once you die, your time is up and that's it. All those same arguments were made for organ transplantation. And now, I try to remind people, look at, grandma, grandpa, whatever, are alive because of that. We take it for granted, some of these technologies. A lot of things that seem science fiction, they seem so far out there. They're out there until they're not. Take a cell phone, for instance. If you take this cell phone here, I don't know if you can see it here. Uh, if I would have argued maybe 40 years ago that I had this device that can communicate with anyone anywhere in the world, and I can also ask questions of it and get information on any topic, it sounds like a crystal ball, like of the Middle Ages, the crystal ball. But yet it's Google, right? And we're just looking up facts in a database, and it's technology. So I like to say that chronics is the same thing. It is a cardiac, like I said before, it's a cardiac arrest code extended out. It's extended out to a future hospital that may exist, may not. I'm not saying that everything is going to happen the way we say it's going to happen in the future. Nobody knows the future. And I remind people, the difference is I'm not saying this is for sure possible, but what I'm saying is it's not impossible. And when they say it's impossible, I think they have a harder burden to breach.
Wonderful. Thank you, Dennis. Anyone here from the local physical crowd has a question for Dennis? Okay, thank you, guys. Anyone joining us on Zoom would like to raise any questions in light of Dennis's words? Okay. Great. So if anything comes up later, please let me know.
I have a question. How long has the Phoenix Group been in existence?
Yeah, so we've been in existence for about 3 years now. And basically, over the years, we've been trying to understand exactly what we need to do in order to establish a first response team here in Israel, which is actually our primary concern. Because, as we realized that since we live here, and even if individually we contract with either CI or Alcor or Tomorrow to be cryopreserved, and we do not have a local service here in Israel, then it's going to be very, very difficult for either of us to actually enjoy the service. So we've been reaching out to the big organizations, trying to establish connections, and mainly trying to garner support from local enthusiasts and people here in Israel, in Israel, trying to understand more about cryonics, trying to maybe see if there's anything that can be done here locally. We have a couple of Facebook groups here in Israel that deal in cryonics, but the subject is really not very widespread. The public awareness is very, very limited. And we've been trying over the years to raise it and to seek support, both financial support, for the infrastructure, for everything that we need to do in order to actually make this first response service possible. And also to get some people to join us as volunteers, as people who would eventually be trained by one of the larger organizations and be able to actually provide the service to whatever customers or whatever subscribers are joining us here in Israel. So that's basically it.
Well, that's fantastic because it's people like you that are starting these grassroots movements, and it really makes a difference. It's not something you can just throw money at or hope that someone else is going to do it. It's one of these things where locally you got to do it yourself. The bigger organizations, we can help, we can guide, and we can point out what has worked in the past. We can point out what hasn't worked in the past, and we can and I encourage you to not just reach out to the large organizations, but also the other support groups that have had standbys. I know Cryonics UK has done a lot of great work. We have a Minnesota group out in the United States that's done some cases, and they really do make a difference. And so, just learning from others and picking up from there, it's so important. And it's really easy. You can go through all the case reports of all the organizations, not just Cryonics Institute, Alcor. I haven't really looked at emails, case reports as much, but I'm sure it's the same thing when you plan, like you're doing, like plan ahead. It's certainly your odds are so much better than if you just kind of roll the dice and hope for the best. And I would encourage you also to look at what I said about vertical integration as far as funding. Maybe get involved with one of the local ambulance companies as far as training in those fields and learn and sign up. Starting with CPRs and going from there and learning how to do cardiac arrest codes and maybe teaming up and investing with or working with an organization like that, because there's no sense in duplicating efforts. A lot of these technologies already exist out there. We just have to tweak it for our own good.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dennis. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for joining us here. Our next speaker is...
Thank you.
I'm sorry?
I said thank you very much.
Thank you, Dennis. Thank you. Our next speaker is James Arrowood. James, I have previously corresponded with Dr. Kfir Levi, who specifically asked to introduce you. I don't know if Dr. Levi is here. Are you here with us? Let's see.
I didn't see him logged on yet, but he's going to pop in here any second because he's been texting me.
Okay.
So we're a little early, but he'll greet everybody when he logs on. So Dr. Nassim is a doctor that's assisting Alcor, and he actually does medical missions to Israel. And so he is a native speaker, I think, or at least has learned, and is a big part of what we're trying to advance here at Alcor in terms of the technology and the science. That's a big commitment we've made. And, my background, for those who don't know, I did emerging technology law for 20 plus years. And what's really interesting in that space is that the Israelis and the Israeli companies were probably the preeminent group in the world that I dealt with in terms of the technologies. What that means to people on this call is that not only for some of the things I was working in, which was healthcare and kind of military technologies, but there could be applications for the science, right? For cryonics, the engineering, the software programming, those sorts of things. Just because of my network, I'm aware that the Israeli companies, they tend to do some of this stuff better than anybody else in the world. And I mean, just really, really impressive technologies, and it reminds me of cryonics as a whole, as an industry, in that we are very small organizations, relatively speaking. Even Alcor, as one of the largest ones, cryonics is a niche. And a lot of the technologies that I was working on were extremely niche technologies, and yet Israel punched way above its weight. It's the best in the world at some of these technologies. And so in working in that environment and seeing what these Israeli companies were doing and how they kind of built themselves into this powerhouse in spite of, a small population and small geographic footprint, frankly, it taught me a lot in terms of how to navigate and hopefully lead a small but powerful organization. When you have limited people and limited resources and things, which we all do in the space. And to Dennis' credit, Dennis and I don't get a chance to interact very much, but Dennis made some great points, I think, that are universal across cryonics generally. A couple of things that I took notes on, but the vertical integration point is a very good one, and something that, frankly, we're actually aggressively working on right now at Alcor, which is the notion that some of these technologies, they're at least dual use, if not triple use or more, and that there's ways. Alcor is a nonprofit, so we are completely reliant upon donors and members to fund what we do. And in that process, however, I've identified a number of what I call ancillary uses. Again, this is something I learned with emerging technologies from some of the companies, where they would create a device or program some software, and it might have a very particular use for a government client. But then, you tweak it and it can now be brought to the commercial market and generate revenue, which can still go back to the research to do the ultimate core goals. And so you're going to, you're going to hear Alcor in the coming months. You're going to hear Alcor working towards those goals. So we are aggressively hiring. We've hired a number of people, brought in a PhD in molecular and cellular biology. We brought in a preeminent young neuroscientist, engineers, mechanical engineers we're working with, fluid thermodynamic engineers, all kinds of folks. So very, very exciting stuff going on, and as it relates to Israel and your group, what's really exciting as well is our deployment model. And by the way, we have different models, and Dennis touched on it. There's the model, I think, that they use, where the SST, as it's known, or I call it deployment recovery, is outsourced. And Alcor did use that model for some time. We still use that in certain instances and in certain cases, and you have to, because you have to be flexible. Like Dennis pointed out, it's a very small market, and that decentralized kind of model where you have big cities that have these kinds of, and it ties to the vertical integration. We all experience that. You have kind of outliers where there's not a population mass of cryonic members. It's incredibly expensive to maintain the SST or the deployment recovery model for 2 members, for instance, in Alcor's case. there's just not enough financial, backing there to make that possible. So we're moving to logistics, or what I call mobility model, where it's based upon time to temperature ultimately, which is what this is all about, right? But you can't sacrifice quality for time. So those are kind of the push-pull dynamics of what you deal with as an operator in the space. And we've come up with a model which has really blown the numbers out of the water in terms of what we call the S-mix factor, which is just an equation that shows the time to temperature and the quality of perfusion and those sorts of things. And, on an average of 3 hours and 56 minutes, 3 to 5 years ago, we've managed to bring that under 2 hours under an average. So that's almost 100%, well, more than 100% improvement if you look at it. We've done that because we're either contracting with or creating, some sort of employment model with folks that are geographically within about a 2 to 3 hour radius based upon transit routes of major airlines and major airports. And how that relates to Israel is we've actively been looking at the Middle East as a geographic region. And now we're at the stage where the model can be put in place very quickly with trained, very highly trained. In fact, we use a mixture of medical people and special forces, in our case, primarily Navy SEALs, and hospice nurses, so folks with specific medical training. They also get additional training. And that's not to take away from local models. Cryonics UK, for instance, is of great assistance in that regard. And so in those cases, we work with both. So we'll have local folks that are trained in kind of basic procedures and techniques to get a patient stabilized very quickly, get ice, get the temperature moving. And then our folks fly in and backfill, but hopefully fly in within a 2 or 3 hour transport model. And so we've actually been, discussing this for the Middle East and for Israel. We opened Alcor Canada last year, and that's been successful. We're pleased with the results there in terms of our team and who we have. In fact, we just, it hasn't fully been talked about. I think it's kind of known, but we have a robust capacity that's coming for training for Western Canada in particular, and they'll be fully trained up by the end of this month. And we actually have a training model where we fly people in from all over the world to come and attend our training, but it's by invitation, and then they form part of the teams. So that can also be kind of a reserve team as well. And I see Lavi's signing in, so hopefully he can greet everybody. Lavi, when you're in, feel free to jump in and greet everybody. I know you were going to say a few things. Lavi is an interventional radiologist by his practice group, and we're actually working on new interpretations of the imagery that we get. So Alcor's moving deeply into kind of, hey, Lavi, we see your head a little bit. You got to move your camera. But in any event, so we're using folks like Lavi, who's a preeminent radiologist in Phoenix here, and very proud to have him helping us out with these things. We're trying to get specialists from all over the world. In fact, we talked to somebody from India yesterday. We've got Wanjin on our team is from Korea. We actually had him fly in from Korea. We're talking to companies in Europe right now. In fact, we announced Alcor Canada last year. Alcor Europe is next, and it's a similar thing to Dennis. Dennis had a lot of great points in the sense that the kind of decentralized model. So in Europe, Western Europe, if you center it, you can actually reach that in terms of deployment models and mobility within about 3 hours in a radial model, which means you have a center point and you have spokes, or hub and spokes model. And, those are things that my background really lends itself to do. And I'm just applying that to the model here at Alcor. And so, again, the Middle East, there's a ton of interest. There's a ton of scientific ability and experience and industry experience and all sorts of things out of Israel and out of other places in the Middle East. Another thing people have to think about from the operator perspective, and Emil, Dennis, we all have to think about these things, is it's not as simple as saying, okay, we're in Jerusalem and we'll open long-term storage and we'll have an operating unit. You have to think about environmental conditions. You have to think about geopolitical issues, right? We talk about locations in Europe where we would have long-term storage, and I had to go out there. We went with Geiger counters in caves, because background radiation can affect DNA, right? Over 50, 100, 200 years. We have to look at history. Where have there been land wars, and where are there corridors for troop movements, and where does bombing occur? Are you too close to any kind of military installations? Those are all deep kind of factor sheets that we would look at in terms of designating long-term storage. But long-term storage doesn't need to be the same as stabilization and standby, right? So if you can get somebody field stabilized, and then you have good logistics and good logistics routes to get people moved out of a space, then you're okay. Meaning you can have your long-term storage 12 hours away or 24 hours away by transport and effectively achieve the goal. And of course, the goal, at Alcor, we want to be constantly, and this is what the staff and I talk about on a daily basis, hopefully, is just be the best in the world. That doesn't mean it's a competitive race. Multiple people can do it differently and be the best in terms of getting equal or similar results. And there's different models. And as much as folks have different ideas, there's a lot of really smart people with really strong ideas, and they're not all the same. So having that kind of dynamic where there's a couple of other groups, I think that's healthy. I think that's useful. We collaborate where we can. We also compete where we have to. I think Dennis made the point that too many organizations right now, there's not an economic feasibility model that works, because this is very expensive to do what we do at the best emerging state-of-the-art level. For those who don't know, Alcor, we actually lose money on cases. It's not, obviously we try not to, but there's a good percentage of cases where we might lose money because we're a nonprofit. We're in it for the research, and we need to do these recoveries because we're testing new modalities. Before they're tested, of course, they're not tested in the field on patients. They're tested and validated in our labs. And if you don't know, if you haven't been to Alcor, you should come. We're at a really exciting time in terms of the laboratory space. We've got commitments financially to build out some space and acquire tools and equipment. The engineering space is done. We just built out new space. Hey, Lobby, you with us? There you go.
Yeah, I apologize. I've just been having some technological issues. Would you like me to introduce you now? Thank you also, James, for your
well, introduce yourself, Lobby.
Okay.
Introduce yourself and tell everybody who you are and greet everybody.
Yeah, thank you. So I have an intro here. יש לי משהו להגיד באנגלית ובעברית, אז שיהיה לכם קצת סבלנות. אני נולדתי בישראל וגרתי שם עד גיל 5. אתם כולכם יכולים לשמוע? Can you guys hear?
שומעים אותך מצוין.
אוקיי, תודה. אז עכשיו אני רופא רדיולוגיה בפיניקס, אריזונה, וזה איפה שאני הכרתי את ג'יימס. אז אני אסביר קצת על אלקור. אני רופא רדיולוגיה אני עובד עם אלקור בפיתוח טכנולוגיות חדשות. זו קבוצה היא המובילה העולמית בפיתוחים קירוניקה, ויש להם חברים מכל העולם. אלקור מקווה להרחיב את המקומים, כולל גם בישראל. אנו מציבים לעבוד עם כולכם, כדי לפתוח את זה למציות. Good evening. My name is Lavi Nissim. I'm a medical doctor in radiology. I work as a full-time physician here in Arizona, but I've been assisting Alcor with developing new technologies, including their imaging modalities. We have some ideas on evaluating patients before and after they go through the cryonics process to assess for changes that we see on imaging, and to use that as a baseline to determine what potential long-term prognoses are for patients after they are potentially thawed. Because, of course, with imaging, we have the capability of seeing the insides of the patient at any time. Alcor is the world's leader in this technology, in cryonics, and has members from all over the world. We have clients from all over the world that maybe James can speak more into. We hope to expand locations, including Europe, Israel, of course, and we look forward to working with some of you to make that a reality. I was actually set to visit Israel. I was there in December, and I was going to go back in February for a solidarity mission. At the time, the timing was off. My wife had some minor health issues that have resolved, but I had to cancel my time. But hopefully, sometime later this year, I can come by again, and maybe I can meet you, Kfir, in person.
That would
Yeah,
be
sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, guys.
Yeah, so okay,
Go ahead, James.
you know,
Please.
well, again, with Lavi, we are, one of the things I think, in particular, American or U.S. folks have a problem with internationally is we tend to come into places and tell people what to do rather than ask them how best to do it in their culture and in their environment. And I learned that working in Europe and studying international law and business in Europe. And so as a leader of an organization, I don't want to do that. Meaning when we expand into a space or a territory like Israel, for instance, you're not going to hear me come in and tell Israelis what they need to do in their cultural environment, right? There's religious sensitivities, obviously. We deal with that elsewhere. Alcor's had to deal with that in other countries and environments. And so having folks in particular, in the case of Israel, like Lavi's traveled to Israel, he has deep roots there and friendships. And, the folks in Israel are going to tell us how we should modify processes and procedures, using the technologies we have and our training model, but also taking advice from folks in terms of how to observe religious sensitivities and pay respect to the cultures in terms of how we operate and how we go about doing things, and including our DART personnel, for instance, are very often from the local communities. So in Israel, we would look at military medics, for instance, that are going to know how to navigate the streets. People don't realize, but navigation of the local environment can be a major impediment, either impediment or a good thing if you have people who know how to, get things from that local environment. And so having this capacity and having this network of folks, including people like Lavi, makes a huge difference when you're trying to start applying, these unique techniques in a certain environment. And Israel is one example. So when Lavi goes over there, he has his own medical mission work to do, but he will peel off a day or two to go attend meetings on behalf of Alcor and meet with interested parties and start talking about, what the reality is on the ground. And at some point, the model allows for sponsorship. We don't take investors, we're a nonprofit, but we can set up local business models. We pay for that. Alcor funds that. And then folks like Lavi can help us identify talent and identify skill sets for people to come in and start building out local teams using our technology and our equipment under license, of course, But you can tell we're serious about it. I want people who can speak the language. I want people are sensitive to the cultural environment, and that way it's not just us coming in and telling you what to do. It's you telling us how best to navigate, and then us giving you the tools to do that, because we want to preserve, people from all walks of life and all cultures and all environments as much as possible. But go on, Kfir. I know you're going to say something to Lavi.
Fair.
I wanted to thank Lavi for his contribution. Would you like to add anything additional, Lavi?
No, actually, just that. Thank you for your patience and pardon, my appearance. I came in late from a flight, quite late last night from a flight, and as you can see, I'm in my office. So, I just came back from a international medical conference, in Nashville that was in my specialty of interventional radiology. So, I think, and actually coming back from that conference, I had some ideas that I did want to discuss with James about imaging. One of the highlights of that conference was the utility of AI. I'm sure everybody talks about that now in Israel as well, about the use of AI to expedite research and development. And so I have some ideas in that realm. But just again, thanks for your time, and thanks for everybody for introducing me. And I think this could be a good collaboration. It looks like somebody's actually about to speak.
Yes, that's me.
Oh, okay.
I wanted to ask a question. Thank you, Lavi, very much.
Yeah.
James, I wanted to ask you, with your permission, I know that I've listened to a podcast that you guys orchestrated around your expansion, possibly to Sweden. And I think that this new location could be very relevant to people in our region of the world, because I think, even though with today's technology, once a person subscribes to this service in Israel, he, of course, can be flown anywhere in the world. But a geographical proximity, I think, is significant. And I wanted to ask you if you could expand a little bit on both on this location as far as you can. I know that it's not set in stone yet. And also, if you could tell us a little bit about how your legal background and your contacts and experience in facilitating this kind of expansion came in handy for you in this context.
Yeah, thank you for the questions, and I'll talk a couple. The first one, the Sweden thing. So I want to make clear, there's a distinction in the model that I'm working on and have created between what I would call a FOB, or forward operating base, and kind of a long-term operating base. So Sweden, actually, the image behind me was generated to mimic what it might look like in Sweden. It is an underground facility. They already store seed storage and documents for survival in the case of a catastrophic disaster or war. We are working on that. That's obviously an expensive endeavor. We estimate it'll cost $2 to $3 million for the liquid nitrogen engineering build out and what have you. So we're working on that. But Sweden is just Sweden is a location for long-term storage. And as you pointed out, that's different than field stabilization. So we're actually working on a FOB, a forward operating base, probably out of Germany, which I know whereas Emil is at. Germany is centralized. Where we would be, actually, we've already met with the airlines. So we're negotiating with the airlines on quick access to cargo, meaning when you ship, cargo is a point where you're delivering a body, a patient, to cargo, and it can get held up. And of course, time to temperature, that's a major problem. So we want to get priority status as a biological organ procurement organization kind of situation. And you can kind of do some of that when you talk to the airlines. So we're actually literally in the middle of those discussions. I can't promise anything because you don't know. You're relying on third parties. But like Dennis mentioned, triple redundancies are part of that model. So Sweden would really be kind of the final destination in terms of long-term storage, but by no means is it the forward operating base, right? The forward operating base is again based upon this radial hub and spoke model. And the hub in this case is where you can do standbys in the field or stabilization in the field and have it be at the highest quality. Right now, many organizations, we struggle with short-term notice, and then cases have to be converted to kind of a straight freeze, which is the least optimal outcome, I think. And, I've studied that quite a bit. And it doesn't matter who you are. It's whether it's Alcor or some other organization, we all have that problem. Notice, I know Dennis talked about some of the apps. We're working on that. In fact, I have meetings in 3 weeks with app developers and programmers because notice is one of the biggest challenges, and you have to get people there in time. So in Israel, the model would look something like this. There would be a kind of an address in Israel, right? And typically it's a seed when it starts. It's very small, and it's through volunteers like yourselves and folks like yourselves. And we plant the seed by providing training and providing access to equipment. So if you don't know, the equipment just to do field stabilization, can be very expensive. So you have to park it somewhere that's secure, and it can't just be left with people who are untrained, because as much as the volunteer model worked in the past, we're trying to get beyond that, right? We want to have, at the minimum, volunteers that have some specialized training, because that equipment can be $50,000, $100,000 worth of stuff. And then, of course, if you get into drugs and some of the drugs that we would have, you want medical doctors because they're licensed and they can have it. And then you need a secure location that's 24/7, 365 accessible. You need a team of at least 2 people, one on, one off. These are all military kind of special forces based modeling systems. In fact, our map, our world map is super cool. If you see it at kind of our operations center. So that's something where we actually use a mission planning map that the special forces use for our patients now and our membership. So we identify where they are in the world, and then where our nearest mobility or logistics hub is to them, and then are working into that. So that's where Sweden comes in as a final destination, but the forward operating bases are where we would have a 2 to 3 hour radius. And Israel, of course, is about 2 to 3 hours away by flight from most of the Middle East. And of course, Israel is a very secure environment. So it would provide, obviously with Lavi and some of the medical contacts, we need ideally specialized space, an operating room or a funeral home type place to do the process that we want to do. So we need those relationships, and that ties into the legal background. Again, my legal background, over 20 years, international law. I lived, in London and worked in the British government a little bit on some things. And, that's provided me a network of people. It's really interesting because Alcor is a complete random thing, right? That kind of came from left field. I've been working on a number of other things. I've worked on startups. I've helped with medical device and military technology companies and what have you. But Alcor was kind of this really good fit because it encompasses all of these sorts of things in the sense of you have urgency. You have a life and death kind of situation in terms of timing. But at the same time, it's not just so much that you're triaging and you're tourniqueting and you're, getting somebody off to a big hospital for a high-tech procedure. You have to do all of that. And the network that I have to facilitate that came into play right away, meaning when I came into Alcor and I identified some of what I thought were the logistic modeling issues with SST, we were able to create DART and find highly qualified, what are called 18 deltas, which are trauma surgeon trained Navy SEALs. So they both have mobility, but also the capacity to very quickly learn how to access, the carotids or other things on the medical side. And their training was paid for by the government. So Alcor didn't have to come in and invest heavily in advanced training. And then we saw the results, and we weren't sure, right? Because you want to validate those and you want to see them more than an N of 1. You want to see an N of 10 or 20. So since DART was implemented, we now have something like 30 or 40 cases where the times have just remarkably been better, and that's not to knock anybody in the past, because volunteers do the best they can. But really, I mean, Alcor, frankly, we should have done better sooner, I think, as an organization with a 50-year plus history. I think that's where, in my legal background, but I had a very unusual legal background. I wasn't kind of your typical lawyer sitting there just drafting documents all day. I was out a fair amount in what I would call the field, in the sense of meeting with folks that were actual operators. So very often I would get invited to go into the desert or other locations and meet with the operators. And this has to do with what's called design defect. When either a device or a product is not used the way it was intended by the operators, that creates liability, it creates accidents, it creates collateral damage. And so sometimes having a legal mind out in the field to see how they're actually handling a system, for instance, you can kind of identify components that could be designed differently or better to eliminate or alleviate some of the liability issues. And I happen to be the person that was sent forward to look at those things and examine those things. And it just has to do with kind of how you view model systems and what have you. And for some reason that was something I was good at. And that taught me a ton. And then coming to Alcor, where the technology that is state of the art last year shouldn't be the technology that's state of the art a year from now, right? In emerging technology, by definition, everything you're doing should be advancing as quickly as you can within the parameters of quality. And so I'm bringing that to Alcor, and we're doing it. I mean, we're seeing it. And we have, I think, 8 patents now in process. I know there's been some critiques on the patent stuff, because people are like, well, you should share it for the good of all and blah, blah, blah. No doubt, that's not the issue. The issue is that some folks I encountered were monetizing stuff Alcor had developed, right? And so just to be a smart steward of the technology, you want to protect it and keep it in a place where we can control the licensing of it, for instance. So that was something in my legal environment. If you weren't a lawyer, you wouldn't know that was a protection you needed to implement right away. Because what happened was other folks were patenting things, and then they were making exclusive and then charging a very high premium for it. And so it wasn't going to be available for the betterment of kind of all. In fact, bringing in folks like Levi, what people don't realize, so Alcor recently, we're super excited. Somebody donated, I think, a lot of money. I think the machine is almost $1 million. But one of these advanced CT scan machines is part of our lab. It's going to be part of our lab. It's getting installed here in a week. But you have this great piece of equipment, and you have a bunch of cryonicists, and that doesn't mean they're qualified. They can be brilliant in computer science, but they don't know how to read images and tell you exactly, why is this part of the brain slightly less dense than another part of the brain, right? When you did the cryoprotective procedure the way you want to do it, and it looks really good in the field, and you get it back, and now you're seeing a differential in the imagery. Well, there isn't a uniform standard right now in terms of reading and applying, standards to these images. So they can be interpreted a number of ways. And I said, I want to get somebody objective. I want to get somebody, and that's another thing I've done at Alcor from my legal background, is evidence matters and credibility matters. And this goes to something Dennis talked about. And you asked an earlier question, Kfir, about bridging that gap of credibility where we're seen as science fiction. I'm bringing into the field, I think, the notion that in a court of law, when you make an opening statement and when you start to talk to witnesses, your witnesses need to be credible. And your expert witnesses, they have to be really credible, which means those judges will absolutely go through every credential they have. You know, what degree, what research did you do? What's your background in this space? And it's not enough to be a doctor. You have to be a doctor who worked in radiology in order to opine on what that, you know, slide looks like. You can't just give an opinion. Like, it has to be backed by something. And so that's where my legal background is bringing in these outside kind of experts to opine. And then that's going to make cryonics more credible for everybody.
This has been fascinating. Thank you so much. I wanted to ask, again, the crowd here, if anyone has any question for James here locally. Anyone? Okay.
And I wanted to add really briefly, I think just to kind of summarize some of what James said is that, one, he wants everything to be fact-based, not science fiction, and that's why he's brought in collaborators in with their areas of expertise, such as medical expertise. You know, this is all just kind of new discovery, and it's very exciting. When I speak to other physicians here, they're all fascinated by the idea, although, albeit there is some skepticism. But it is all very new, and if we can, you know, be the pioneers in figuring out, you know, not only how to, you know, how to freeze, but also what freezing means to the body. Apologize for that. What freezing means to the body, and potentially then extrapolate from that what we could possibly see when we thaw. I think we would be ahead of the game. And I think also, to answer your other point, I don't think that there is. I think you were trying to ask whether there was some competition with Sweden. Was that part of your question?
I wanted to know a little more about your own, Alcor's own plans on expanding into Sweden, and in that way to provide maybe a more geographically close solutions to
right, and that's
outlook.
Right, and that's, I think, what he alluded to is that, you know, being a 2 to 3 hour flight from Israel, and also Israel being a gateway potentially to really the whole Middle East, as of course you know, a lot of people from around the Middle East send their sickest to places like you know, like Tel HaShomer or Schneider Children's. So being a medical gateway for really much of the Middle East, and that includes a fairly wealthy population, puts you in a pretty good geographic location. As far as the logistics of transfer between Israel and Sweden, I don't know. James would have to speak about that, and I don't know how the timing or the distance factors into that.
We'll have to examine that at a later time. Thank you so much to you both, Levi and James, for this fascinating talk. And we are moving on to our next speaker.
Thank you, Kfir.
Thank you so much.
Toda raba. Thank you.
We're moving on to now Dr. Emil Kendziorra of Tomorrow Biostasis in Germany. Dr. Kendziorra is a medical doctor by training and ex-cancer researcher. He spent the last 10 years as a tech entrepreneur, and after exiting his last 2 companies, he now heads Tomorrow Biostasis, the fastest growing cryonics provider, and a nonprofit research institute in Switzerland focused on cryopreservation research. Last but not least, he is a founding member of CryoDeo. So please, Emil, the stage is yours. Go ahead.
Hey everybody, and good morning, because I'm currently also on the west coast of the US, so currently not in Berlin. I'll give you a quick introduction of what we do at Tomorrow and the European Biostasis Foundation, and then of course I'm more than happy to answer any questions. I got a few slides to kind of give everybody a visual impression, so I'll share those. I don't know, do we do slides? Because I can't share. Sharing is turned on. Well, sharing is not turned on from your side. Otherwise, I can also, of course, just talk about it, whatever your preference is.
We can definitely share slides. I think that you are technically unable to share because you're not a host, but if you
Yes,
send them to
potentially.
me, then I'll be able to share them right now.
Okay, or you could just make enable sharing on the bottom of Zoom.
I can try.
Otherwise, I can.
Yeah, we're trying it right now. Hold on.
I think it should be just next to the share button. There should be a small setting, and it says allow participants to. Anyway, I can already talk a bit about who we are and what we do. So thanks for the kind introduction, first of all. So I run these multiple organizations, right? And why are there multiple organizations?
Yeah, sure now.
Now it works. Amazing. Thank you so much. Let me try that. All right, here we go. Yeah, again, why are there multiple organizations, right? So when we started to build these organizations to do cryopreservation, initially with a focus on Europe and now expanding to other regions of the world as well, we wanted to have one organization that can act very fast, that can do quick innovation and so on. That's Tomorrow Bio. Tomorrow Bio does all the day-to-day stuff. It does the cryoprotection. It does all the SST stuff. It's the standby organization. It does the contracts and so on. And then once someone is cryoprotected, meaning once the perfusion is being done on site, that person is legally be handed over to the Patient Care Foundation and then stored at the European Biostasis Foundation, which is the research institute that we'll show you in a second. And then last but not least, there's CryoDAO, which is an organization. It's one of these decentralized autonomous organizations that I founded together with a couple of people who are very much intrinsically motivated in the space of cryopreservation to fund basic science in that space. And you might have seen a couple of research projects we have already funded, and going forward, we'll fund more and more. Right, so this is the Research Institute. It's based in Switzerland. I'm kind of between Berlin and Switzerland with a lot of US mixed in. Here, cryopreservation storage is underground. I'll show you in a second. It has an operation room, CT scanner, lab, and so on to do everything that is needed to push the field forward. And some of you might, of course, have been there. We do annual meetings there, so you're more than welcome to visit us in person. As I said, operation room. Very important, we have an in-house CT scanner. We had that from the very beginning. We scan, and I'll show you a couple of images in the end. We are scanning all of our patients after cryoprotection. In fact, now we scan them after cryopreservation, meaning at liquid nitrogen temperature. So we do whole body scans at -196 Celsius to then check for how well the perfusion went and how well the cryoprotective agent has it reached all parts of the brain, meaning that there are no ice crystals in these regions.
So Emil, just a quick question. When you say whole body scan, there is some misnomer because some people understand that actually to mean MR technology. It looks like what you're showing is a CT scan.
How do you mean? No, we do a whole body scan of the CT in a CT.
Yeah, but it's a CT scan, not an MRI.
No, it's always a CT. Yeah.
What do you have any? Are you able to share specs on that? Is that a 64 slice? Is it?
It's 16.
60 slice. 60 slice.
16.
16.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's a little bit maybe more of a it's not like you're. I think most hospitals will use a slightly higher end slice.
Yeah, sure, but they do it because of speed, right?
We have the questions at the end. I'm sorry.
We can
okay, absolutely.
Yeah, we can happy to dig into the CT scanning stuff in the end.
Thank you.
All right, lab, of course, to do translational research. We don't do that much basic research, but we do some. But mostly the basic research we outsource to other labs. This is underground storage. It's a bit of an old picture by now. That it's not as nice, clean looking anymore. More doers, a bit more, not chaos, but more stuff like standing around. We're getting new doers right now, not only emergent doers, but also whole body ITS doers. And again, I'm more than happy to elaborate on all of these points if anybody's interested. ITS here means this intermediate temperature storage. Of course, this has been discussed many, many times. To my knowledge, we're still the first who will have a whole body ITS. Currently, there's a bit of brain and neuro ITS, but whole body ITS, I think, is something that is not being done yet. Then, more importantly, we discussed this many times. Storage is one thing, and storage is nice and all good, and it needs to be secure and safe. And of course, for argument's sake, Switzerland very much fits the bill here. But then again, the quality of a cryopreservation case is decided during perfusion and during standby and stabilization and so on. So that's very much what Tomorrow Bio is focusing on. This is one of our ambulances here based in Switzerland. We buy these ambulances and then retrofit them to be mobile operating rooms to do cryoprotection on site. So in all of our cases, we do whole body cryoprotection on site wherever the patient is. And then once that cryoprotection is done, then bring the patient back to Switzerland for cryopreservation and cool down to cryogenic temperatures. A few more of those. We have a couple, and then kind of give you a view of our setups. Like we've historically been mostly based in Europe. We have 2 ambulances right now in Berlin, one in Zurich. We're building another one with a team or collaborating with a team in Italy. There will be a third one. And then in a couple of regions in all over Europe, we have local teams that we collaborate with, that we train, that we kind of train for emergency response. And then since recently, end of last year, we're now active in the US as well, together with RBS, Researchers Biomedical Sciences, the organization out of Florida. Now access to 3 teams and ambulances, and building most likely a 4th one. And then early 2025, currently we're covering only 3 states in the US, California, Florida, and New York. And going forward, we'll cover all of the continental US. That will be probably somewhere in May, once we're comfortable that the whole body cryoprotection can be done sufficiently to our quality standards. Right, inside these ambulances, they're pretty much mobile operating rooms, right? So they're not technically ambulances anymore, but mobile operating rooms, perfusion circuits, cool down equipment, a lot of monitoring equipment, and so on. And again, all of those for whole body field cryoprotection. I know that whole body field cryoprotection has been done, of course, in the past, but I think usually it's a mix. We do this in every case. And all of these ambulances are by now fully standardized. So if in Israel you at some point would like to maybe build one or have one, we're more than happy to kind of give all the, in quotation marks, blueprints and to build one from scratch. This is what we're currently doing in Italy, and we're more than happy to do this in every region of the world. Always, our part comes for free, right? All the labor and so on. If someone someone just needs to pay for the material. And then there's one provision, meaning that if we have a patient in that region, we would be able and allowed to use that ambulance. So feel free to reach out. We do very, very extensive trainings, and we're also more than happy to train other people. So this was one of the trainings that we did recently in Berlin with a team of people from the US. And if anybody wants to come to us in Berlin and be trained in, either first aid procedures or stabilization procedures, or even going into whole body field cryoprotection, then we're more than happy to do that. Whole body field cryoprotection, of course, doesn't take one training; it takes multiple trainings. So this is not something that you could just come by and then be ready, right? But if you want to be on that path to do that, then we're more than happy to do that as well. And when I say training, it's actually not fully correct. We technically don't do trainings anymore. We do A to Z simulated cases, including aortic cannulation and everything. As the introduction said, I think by now we're still the fastest growing, by far I think the fastest growing organization, right? We haven't been around for that long, of course, but by now we've crossed 800 members. fingers crossed. Let's see how it goes. But next year or the one after, at least by members, by patients, we're going to take a long time to catch up to the other organizations that have been around for much longer. Just because on average the members who sign up with us are relatively young, but by membership number, I think we're going to be the largest relatively soon. And then coming back to that CT scanning question, right? This is just to give you a visual impression of how the post CT scan analysis here looks. Of course, these are pseudo colors, right? CT scans are black and white and grayscale, and then with calibration curves, these are being calibrated to understand the concentration of cryoprotective agent at every point. And long story short, everything that's green has reached a concentration high enough to not have ice crystals form. Everything that's red or yellow has not reached these concentrations. But then again, all the brain, as you can see here, these yellow spots there, the ventricles and vessels and so on, pretty much the whole brain has reached the concentration. And then we quantify that, and then we're somewhere in the ballpark of 99% of the brain that is higher, has reached higher concentrations of cryoprotective agent than needed to not have ice crystals form. And there will be new calibration curves. Right now, calibration curves are being done with historically, and right now, and this is also in our case, the case, they're being done with pure CPA, so pure cryoprotective agent, which is not fully ideal. So new calibration curves that we're currently working on in the next couple of weeks and probably maybe month, we'll have them. They're based on brain tissue. So they're basically brain tissue that is immersion diffused. And then we're probably going to recalibrate all of the CT scans in the past and, of course, going forward using these new calibration curves. And before we're happy to go into any questions that anybody might have, what's next? There have been, and of course I've been preaching that for a long time, and of course we also talked privately. There's always a lot of organizations being set up in different regions of the world, but there's a difference between setting up an organization, which is great, and I'm more than happy that you guys are doing that. But the goal, I think, would be to now move on to actually build local capabilities. And of course, you said that in the introduction, and we just want to say we're more than happy to help with that. So as I said, everything we do, training, equipment, I don't know how stuff works, how we're doing things, procedures, and so on. We're more than happy to share that all and everything, like including the 3D, the files to do the 3D printing of the custom pieces that we build, and so on and so on. So we're more than happy to share everything. Just let's talk, and anyway we're of course in contact. It's of course also totally fine to start small, right? It doesn't need to be an ambulance. An ambulance is a bit of a it takes a couple of 10,000 euros or dollars to build one. But start somewhere and then expand. And then for any other type of collaboration, more than happy to chat. So just reach out and we can talk.
Thank you, Emil. Thank you. I really appreciate everything that you said. I'd like to ask you, with your permission, if you could expand a little bit on the science, in the sense that I've been checking around, and I know that, for instance, Alcor uses a vitrification fluid called M22, which is highly regarded. And I know that you use a different solution, and I'm wondering if you could expand on the principle level on differences in cryopreservation as far as today's technology is concerned, and what it means that you as an individual are being preserved in one organization versus the other, and what it means that an individual reaches the point of cryopreservation when he is either relatively sick or relatively in good physical condition, and how does that bear on the quality of their preservation and how we're looking towards the future in this sense?
Yeah. Okay, cool. And of course, feel free to follow up if I'm not, because I'm trying to answer these questions relatively quick, because you can talk a long time about them. So first question, the cryoprotective agents. Second question, being at different organizations. And third question, remind me, what was the third question?
The future of cryopreservation, how and how we're looking like in 10 to 20 years from now, and how much it matters the physical
Yeah. If you sick or
condition
not, and
of
so on.
the
Yeah. Okay, cool. Absolutely. So first question, different cryoprotective agents. So yes, Alcor uses M22. We use what we call tomorrow VM1, which is a variant of VM1. So there are three factors for cryoprotective agents. Of course, it's more difficult in detail, but kind of by and large. So A is how good a glass former they are. So how good a vitrification agent they are, how toxic they are, and how easy they are to perfuse, right? If you have very high viscosity cryoprotective agents, for example, then they're difficult to perfuse. Now, these are the factors in the lab. In the real world, there's another factor, which is price. Cryopreservation for humans is not done under lab conditions. So under certain edge cases, M22 in a lab setting shows higher viability, but we're talking here, we're talking, I don't know, 80% to high 80% or 90 to higher 90% ranges in viability. So under certain circumstances in certain cell lines, M22 shows higher viability rates. But I would argue these viability differences are negligible and not relevant in the real world. And the reason for that is that in the real world, we anyway don't look for viability because we cannot rewarm, right? Viability is totally irrelevant, at least as of today. Or more precisely, viability in human cryopreservation can currently not be checked. So my focus would be on structural preservation. And of course, I'm more than happy to elaborate on any of these points. Now, it comes down to now that M22 is significantly, like, I don't know, maybe it might be, it's more than an order of magnitude more expensive. Now, for every cryopreservation case, tomorrow just has more money available to be able to send teams earlier, to be longer on standby, to bring more doctors, and so on and so on. So on average, in a real-world cryopreservation case, we have decided that is a better trade-off to come to the better preservation results in the end. Nevertheless, we have nothing against M22. There's no problem with M22. If someone wants to have M22, then we can. So our teams are trained for that as well. So that would also work just as a standard case with our cryopreservation minimums. We use a different cryoprotective agent and rather invest that extra money in being faster, having more teams, and so on and so on. And then long story short, or in the end, let's compare CT scans. Like in the end, the CT scan is the data point that is the outcome. Everything else is like theoretical. And now that our CT scans look good, we will move on to adding ultrastructure preservation, so electron microscopy, with consent, of course, for that small samples need to be taken. And then once that data is available, we can compare that. To your second question regarding different organizations, so if you store it here or there, I think there is no big difference, right? I don't know. I think the US is safe. I think Switzerland is safe. I think that there's as long as there's a patient care trust with enough money and so on, I think there's no super big difference. And then to your last question, is there a big difference between cryopreserved sick or healthy or so on? Probably not. One exception, that exception is neurodegenerative diseases, right? If you died due to long neurodegeneration, then yes, there is definitely a difference. But most likely, and of course, when I talk about the long-term future, this is always speculative. Most likely, the level of technology that needs to be around to be able to bring someone back from current cryopreservation technology would need to be sufficiently or so advanced that it would also be able to pretty much cure, for argument's sake, any disease. Neurodegeneration, of course, is an exception. There might be other edge cases, but by and large, there should not be a big difference. So I think the best you can do is live as healthy as possible, as long as possible, so that we have time to improve the quality of cryopreservation as much as possible.
Thank you so much, Emil. Really, I really appreciate this talk and all the information you shared with us. Any questions from the local audience?
I have a question, if you
Yes.
may.
Sure.
This would be both to Emil and James Arrowood. So with the CT scans, I imagine that someone who is preserved with very quickly with very short periods of warm ischemia, cold ischemia, and everything works out right, the CT would look very good. Whereas a patient where, things went wrong, or maybe they had a vascular problem, you'd see some poor perfusion and so forth. I mean, I kind of see that as like a given, but I guess a more important question is there has either of the both organizations seen any actionable results and made actual changes based on the results from the CT information and the CT scans? Because I'd like to learn from that and learn if that has taken place yet, or if that's something that we see maybe down the road in the future. And then I had one other question, and that was about the CIVM1 variant that you guys use over at Tomorrow Bio. I was just curious as to how it is different than the CI variant.
Yeah. Maybe to answer the second question first. So it's a different buffer. It's different concentration setups, and there's a couple of small. I'm happy to send it. Like it's not like a secret or anything. So these are and then we do different washout. So we do MHP2 washout, and then the first step. And maybe Dennis, correct me, but I think the first step you guys are doing with washout is just EG, I think. So we do MHP2 and then directly go. The first step is basically a 5% weight per volume, 5% weight per volume CPA, meaning EG and DMSO mix, and then of course carrier solution. I think these are all the differences. There will probably be more differences soon with blood-brain barrier modification, but this is currently the main differences. And then coming to your first question regarding actionable results from CT scanning. So yes, so first of all, CT scan results are clearly correlated with warm ischemia or any type of ischemia. They're also, of course, correlated with how do you do perfusion, carotids versus aortic cannulation. In our case, we always do aortic cannulation to hit the vertebral arteries, and not only if you have an incomplete or like a compromised circuit of Willis. So there's a couple of other things that would be impacted. Now, from a tangible, what kind of changes did we make based on CT scans? For us, CT scanning is currently I don't think there are that many big changes we've made so far, because if you look at our case reports, all of the CT scans that we had, bar one, where someone died due to a stroke and it's just parts of the brains, they're not well perfused. All of our CT scans are pretty good. Always in the high 80s to high 90s % of the brain has reached concentrations sufficient for vitrification. So if we would have more bad CT scans, we would try to figure out what went wrong there, right? There is the problem with improving is not necessarily that there is nothing to improve. The amount of cryopreservation cases that we and anybody, to be fair, does, and the external compounding variables, right? Amount of ischemia, what the person died of, how old they were, right? Blah blah blah. There's so much compounding variables that it's very difficult to, with the small amount of sample size, to make any changes because you just don't have enough data. You can't attribute this to any specific factor. Last but not least, since we use multiple different teams, for us it's also just a team comparison, right? Are different teams as good as how we like them to be?
Yeah, Emil, I wanted to chime in actually that I agree. You really need N of hundreds, if not thousands, to infer anything from the CT appearance, especially
with all the confounding factors. What did the patient die of? Ischemia time? How is the cryo preservative administered? What underlying issues do they already have? What vascular, if they have a vascular problem like you alluded to, and they're not getting the cryopreservative. So I think a question I would have is, are you imaging patients prior to their time of death? I know that can somewhat be a little bit hard to time, and the ethical principles of that is a little bit complex.
Sorry, did you say image prior to death?
Correct.
No, because I mean they're not with us, right? So I mean they're in some hospitals.
Right,
and so we usually don't have access to patients prior to death. I mean, if people get CT scans prior to death, right? But I mean, we wouldn't have no authority to image anybody prior to death, right? Like, what's the medical indication to do?
If you had access to that, though, then you could really see how much of, because as you had mentioned, some patients, especially elderly patients, for example, even if you image their brain prior to death, there's a lot of abnormality already there.
Sure.
So it's hard to know how much abnormality is attributable to stuff that they had prior to your intervention. Yeah. And so having that baseline, I think anytime you want to do a scientific study, right, you need a control. And so what you need to see is what the brains look like prior to death to really tell what is happening afterwards. And that way, let's say you saw that a certain technique was affecting perfusion to the brain on one side, or you're not getting to the deeper tissues, you can know that you can modify that technique. But you don't know if that appearances could be related to something they had at baseline before you even did your intervention.
Yeah, no. So I mean, having CT scan data prior to death would be interesting, right? Like, absolutely. But outside of a clinical trial, where I don't think anybody would approve a clinical trial for cryopreservation right now. So again, what would be the medical indication to do a CT scan prior to death? Right? We would definitely not have that. So we're pretty much reliant on, if the patient gets a CT scan for other reasons, and then we get the medical history, the medical files.
And if you might. Yeah. If you don't mind me asking, do you obtain, is imaging part of the consent process for the whole cryopreservation?
Post-death, you mean?
Yes, post-death.
I mean, it's part of our informed consent documents.
That they will be.
But then again,
got it.
Right, but then again, we talked about radiation and so on. I mean, post-death, that's all totally relevant, right? Like, because I mean, what's the difference? What's the danger of double strand breaks, right? James also mentioned like background radiation, right? We did not check for that because in my mind that's absolutely irrelevant because you don't have cell division. So even if you have a double strand break somewhere, right? So what? The cells don't divide, so you don't get cancer or anything. So from a CT scan perspective, of course, prior to death, you would absolutely need some, medical indication plus consent. Post death, the amount of X-ray radiation you get during that CT scan, I see zero.
Would not be.
Bobby,
oh, sorry.
Bobby, let me jump in here because I want to get to Dennis's question as an operator. And, obviously, Lavi, specializing in this stuff, he could go real deep on it. And so, Lavi, we don't have time for that right now. But the actionable results issue, Dennis, we're looking at refining, in the sample size. To Emil's credit, he mentioned that they have a very small sample size. Alcor doesn't. We have a much larger sample size. And we are actually in the midst of a project of CT scanning going all the way back, meaning patients that were preserved 30, 40 years ago. So we're going to have these comparative samples. We actually have somebody creating a database of some of those variables Emil talked about, because those other variables play a big role too, right? And we think with the application of artificial intelligence, they'll be able to sift through this 50 plus years of data that we have, that we can then correspond with modern CT scans. Okay. And that's immensely valuable because of that sample size, over 200 brains that we'll be able to look at. So we are excited to look at that. The other thing that we're implementing in terms of some of the CT scan information, not so much on the detail, because to everybody's point, we still are figuring out what it means, all of these density images and things like that. Rather, on the operational side, what I want to know is when we see a CT scan and there's a clear difference, maybe we don't know all the details of why the CT scan is so different between one patient and another. Operationally, we're actually seeing that accessing the carotids and getting to the brain first in terms of closing that circuit is showing the best results. So operationally, we're thinking that, there might be alterations to the process itself at some point. We're not going to make any changes until we validated this multiple times, right? In science, an N of 1 is kind of worthless, or an N of 5 is not that much, or whatever. But we are examining whether there might be some changes to the field process in terms of access points and what have you for the brain preservation on the basis of the CT scan results. But we're still a long ways away from that. And, Alcor does have a high case percentage, relatively speaking. We're averaging about 24 cases. So 2 a month, excuse me. So we are starting to get, actionable data, but I'm not a radiologist, and so we're getting outside consultants that aren't necessarily cryonic specialists, because it's a whole new area, but their credentials are pristine, right? I mean, Lobby's credentials as a radiologist are world class. I mean,
I'd like to ask James. Thank you so much for this contribution and response. I'd like to ask all of you. First of all, I also thank you so much, Emil, for everything that you said to you today. We're going to take a break of about 10, maybe 15 minutes for the local audience to have some refreshments and freshen up a little bit. And then I'm going to step back here. We'll still have 3 more speakers this evening. So thank you everyone who has contributed so far this evening. Take some time off, but stay with us, and we'll be back in about 10, 15 minutes. Thank you so much.
Hey, Dennis, good to see you, man. We haven't had a chance to connect really. Would love to have an opportunity to connect more. Obviously Alcor has had a lot going on, and we're actually, I think we're in a really good place right now, financially and organizationally. It took some speed bumps over the last year and a half, but our team is getting built out. And CI, I know you guys have a lot of experience going way back as well. So those are valuable things, and we still refer people to CI if they're not a good fit for what we do. We just different models, right?
I appreciate that, and I appreciate I really appreciate everything both you, James, and Emil are doing to advance the science and technology. And I think there's a lot that we can learn from each other, and there's a lot we can do to help each other. And that's all I wanted. That's all we try to do, is do the best we can with what we have, and fight the good fight, save lives.
Tough nut to crack, man. We all stepped into a tough nut to crack. And I think we all come at it from different angles, and we all have different probably strengths. Emil's very good in certain ways, and Dennis, I think you've created a different kind of model that's very good for industries. I mean, industries need to have different models, right? And because it attracts people that might not be attracted to Alcor, might be attracted to CI or to tomorrow for different reasons. And that's okay. That's, I don't want us to be in a bum fight position where we're all a small group that's fighting each other over the same thing. So
no, absolutely. I think we sent 2 patients actually to Dennis, to you guys, like in the last month.
We appreciate that. Thank you. Everything we can learn from the CT as far as actionable results or tweaks to the formulas. And, as we learn different things too, we're pretty open source at CI. We like to help others, and we like to do what we can Sometimes, I think that sometimes the enemy of a good job can be striving too hard to do. There's a mission creep, too many things, and we try to I've seen that when I was working in cardiac arrests and ambulances, and everyone was sometimes they would. The CPR would take a back seat to trying to intubate a patient or something like that, right? Something more advanced, but we'd forget the basics. And I'm trying to just hammer home the basics, and I think we all have our own different place in the puzzle, I guess. And yeah, we just want to learn from you guys what we can and share as much as we can along the way, and advance all of cryonics for everyone.
Sure.
Emil, you're out in Berkeley.
Yes, just arrived
How's that
yesterday.
going? How's
So
that
far, so
going?
good. So far, so good. Yeah.
With travel, because I'm wondering how the travel stuff's going to go with all the U.S. stuff that's going on.
Yeah. I mean,
Nothing.
yeah, probably stuff is happening, but statistically speaking, I think this is, as it always was.
Gotcha.
Yeah. No, amazing.
Well, Dennis, I'm working on a DART model that's going to be more accessible, and I talked to Emil about this at the time. In the U.S. in particular is challenging because of liability. And so anytime you're having a deployment team that's working, under contract for, say, a third party and not actually captive, just being a lawyer, that's my background. There's a lot of liability exposure there. And as a nonprofit, we can't subject Alcor to that yet, but I am working, first I wanted to test the model, the prototype, meaning we didn't know if it would be successful in terms of DART and, the teams that were deploying, and we didn't know. It was a complete kind of gamble in that sense. But demonstrably, they're fantastic. They're just lights out in terms of the scientific outcomes. And again, this is, we got a PhD in molecular biology looking at all this stuff now and verifying it. But we're seeing just super high quality results in like half the time, historically half the time. And I will tell you
but
that
you don't have the CTs. Oh, sorry. Yeah. You don't have the CT scans yet, do you?
We have some. Yeah, sure.
Okay, cool. Yeah.
But it's interesting too, because I was looking at the scan you put up on the display. And the chemicals make a difference, right? So they're doing slightly different things.
No, they shouldn't.
Well,
because you would have an MHP2 calibration curve, right? Whereas we use a calibration, you have different I don't think they would make that much of a difference.
Well, I'm looking at like the brain, what looked like the brain in the CT scan you showed. We expect to see some dehydration. A little bit of the cranial cavity. Some dehydration.
So we have that. So for us, that's really because so this is a scan where there was some amount of warm and cold ischemia mix, and I think by this scan, so in other scans we see that as well, but I think this scan we got lucky in quotation marks that the amount of ischemia opened the blood-brain barrier enough to not cause edema and still allow perfusion, but enough to have cryoprotective agent go into the tissue to not cause dehydration. But I think we were just lucky. This is not the other scans. We see that as well, like dehydration.
But then the trade-off was you had to allow for some ischemic damage, presumably, right?
Yeah. This was not up to us, right? So the hospital just gave us the body. Yes. So that's what I was saying. We will now add on for every patient that gives consent to take microsamples to do electron microscopy. Because ischemia, currently everybody's estimating ischemia, but on an ultrastructural preservation standpoint, who knows what that actually means? 1 hour of warm ischemia or 1 hour of S mix or 2 hours or whatever, right? So the CT scan this is CT scan is an incomplete metric. It only tells you, did you get enough cryoprotective agent into the brain to not have ice crystals form? It doesn't tell you anything about how the ultrastructure looks. So to have direct measurements of ultrastructure, that's why we're adding on electron microscopy now.
Well, and I think again we have different approaches. Clearly, my approach is I'm not a medical doctor. I don't pretend to be. I'm not a molecular biologist. I don't pretend to be. So I go out and find those people who are the best. What I look for are people that would hold up in a court of law under what's called the Daubert standard. So the U.S. legal system has a standard called the Daubert standard, which means their expertise would actually be cross-examined in a court of law. They would have to be qualified by a judge that is objective, that would say that their academic credentials and their, it's not enough to have the degree, they have to have research history and they have to have all these things. And then they would qualify as an expert. Because I do expect, Emil, less so for you in Europe, you just don't have the litigation environment we have in the US, which is a credit to Europe. I think our system is a mess because of it. But that, for me, is why I brought in this PhD in molecular biology from, great school, and he ran a great lab or helped run a great lab at University of Southern California, because those people are going to look at the electron microscopy and everything else, and they're going to know what they're looking at. They've seen thousands of examples of cells and things, and then we brought in a neuroscientist, a brain engineer, I think is his actual degree background, but his credentials are unassailable. In the radiology, what I need to happen, and I think we all need this to happen, is we need that level of expertise. You need a lobby who has seen tens of thousands of brain images in his career, and he knows what normal looks like better than any of us, to then correlate that with the molecular biologist, right? I mean, those two need to get in a room together and they need to compare notes, and Levi needs to say, this is what I'm seeing, but what are you seeing on the molecular side? And then do that times 300 to start to get to a baseline standard.
So, but you need to start somewhere, right? So that's why we start. You need to start somewhere, right? So that's why we take samples, right? Without the samples, we don't even have any data, right? Currently, this data doesn't exist.
My question is, well, I have a question for both. First of all, is this just between us here, or is this going out right now?
I think it's going out.
I think there's other people. Yeah,
but I personally don't mind. So whatever you want to like.
Well, okay. Well, my question is, a lot of this technology used to image the brain is in conventional medicine is used. There's interventions that happen right away. Like we're looking for a stroke, and so we're gonna do something about it. A lot of times with cryonics, we're not going to do anything with a bad. We got warm ischemia. We're not going to actually intervene. We're just, we messed up. We should have went faster, or we need to do something so that we could have been quicker. Our team should have been faster, et cetera, et cetera. But to me, it costs a lot of money, and to your point, about costs. Costs are a factor, and what bang or cost benefit analysis are you getting for that dollar spent? If it's telling me, if the main message is speed up and cut down on the warm ischemia, cut down on the cold ischemia, that's the main message. I mean, because obviously the images are going to be a heck of a lot better for those patients than for the patients where things went bad. And so I hate to sound like a layperson.
No, I mean, you're not totally wrong there. I think to be fair, I think the main message is yes, just be faster next time, right? Yeah. I mean, we do change. So if we have cases with large amount of ischemia, we do change procedures, right? But the change is not necessarily informed by the CT scan or not. It's just by the amount of ischemia, right? We could have also made that decision without having had a CT scan. So there might be a couple of things, right? You could, for example, under certain circumstances, do decompressive craniotomy, right? You could, in theory, cannulate the ventricles, So there are procedures that you could, in theory, do.
Yeah.
I don't know if they would make anything significantly better. You could, in theory, if you have a case that the perfusion we do at the facility, we could technically do intra-perfusion CT scanning. So that if we see a part of the brain is not perfused, right, maybe we do decompressive craniotomy over this part, right? Maybe start immersion vitrifixation after. Right? I'm saying there is, in theory, there is stuff that you could do, but I think, to be fair, the majority currently is a bit academic. Like, yes, we collect all this data, and down the line there might be. So let me rephrase. I do it because of the following way. So CT scan is the minimum requirement. If we see ice crystal formation, then we need to optimize the CT scan, right? We need to do something, be faster or whatever. Now, our CT scans, we did not expect that they look so good so fast. So we thought we need more time to optimize the CT scans. If now the ultrastructure does not look acceptable to good, I'm going to consider changing the whole model. Basically, going as far as building our own hospices, where people can, die there under half-controlled circumstances and so on. Because I think it's more so, are we on the right track, or do we need to change something fundamentally? Right? Meaning, so if ultrastructure looks horrible, right, then we are on the wrong track. And if CT scans would have looked horrible, we would have reconsidered changing something fundamentally. But since they're not on that level, we don't seem to need. There doesn't seem to need to be a change.
Dennis,
Thank you.
I
We resume our sessions.
To be continued.
And there will be
Happy to chat on that.
This is the opportunity for you guys to talk, but I hope we have more of them. Please, let's go back to the program, please. Yeah.
This is really refreshing to both to meet everybody here and to have a chance for all you guys all over the world to converse and to share ideas and thoughts. And this is actually very exciting and refreshing. And I'm really glad that this serves as an infrastructure for that. I think that's a wonderful, wonderful opportunity. I'd like to move on to our fourth speaker. So I'd like to introduce Mr. Max Moore of Biostasis Technologies in the US. Max founded the first cryonics organization in the UK and Europe in 1986, and he's been signed up for the procedure since then. Max served as Alcor's president and CEO for almost 10 years, and another 2 years as Alcor's ambassador. For the last 2 years, Max has been part of the Biostasis Technologies team, writing a book on biostasis and cryonics, writing regular blog essays, recording podcasts, and doing interviews and talks. At the age of 61, he's very eager to make biostasis work as well as possible. Max will talk today about launching cryonics effectively in Israel. Max, are you with us?
Hello, my name is Max Moore. The title of my talk is Launching Cryonics Effectively in Israel. I've been involved in cryonics for around 40 years now, it's hard for me to believe, and I think I've learned a few things in that time. I think I can share some ideas, and I thank the organizers for inviting me to participate here so I can convey what little I might have learned over that time. Now, you face a great and noble challenge in starting a cryonics organization in Israel. Apart from the challenges of your times that you have there for organizing anything, the fact is that cryonics is highly unusual, not very popular, and quite hard to understand. So it's really quite a grand challenge, and it takes some courage and persistence to make this work. And I want to emphasize the importance of cryonics from the context of life extension. Many of you will be very aware of all the advances going on in life extension, or rather the claimed advances in life extension, because in fact, we haven't actually managed to increase the human lifespan by 1 month even since this record was set in the late 1990s. And personally, I'm a little bit pessimistic that within certainly my time, being in my 60s now, but for many people, I don't think life extension will come fast enough. So we will need cryonics, or biostasis as I prefer to call it. In fact, I would say that cryonics should be your plan A for life extension. It should be your emergency fund, basically. Like if you're saving, the first thing you do is to have an emergency fund. And I would say that cryonics is that emergency fund. You don't know when you'll need it. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the cultural context of starting a cryonics organization in Israel. 3 ideas that are essential to understanding cryonics, 3 facts that justify the practice of cryonics, the importance of standby stabilization and transport, or SST, and how our organization, Biostasis Technologies, can help with procedures and standards. First of all, I want to emphasize that I understand what position you're in there. I know what it's like. I'm also a founder of a cryonics organization. I started an organization back in 1986 in England called MISAR, which was intended to be essentially an English branch of Alcor. It wasn't actually officially legally that way, but that's the way we planned it. I went over to California in 1986 in the summer to do training. I spent 6 weeks actually there getting trained by Mike Darwin, Jerry Leaf, and others. Went back to England with a heart-lung resuscitation machine and a box of drugs and various other things, and that's kind of how we got started. So I know what it's like. After that, I've also volunteered a number of times at Alcor in the late 80s and early 90s, throughout the 90s. And then I ended up running Alcor for about 9.5 years, present for 9.5 years, another 2 years working on communications for Alcor. So I've had quite a bit of experience with the area. So let me talk a little bit about the culture. Is it positive? Is the culture in Israel positive or negative for starting an organization like this? Well, first of all, I would say, in one sense, it's clearly an excellent culture for this kind of thing. After all, Israel is often referred to as a startup nation. The dynamic entrepreneurial culture, which is often ranked #1 in startups per capita, but is at least ranked in the top 3 consistently, along with Singapore and Estonia. So you've got the venture capital, kind of the business starting mind. Now, this is, of course, a different kind of organization, but that means you have that kind of dynamic culture where people are willing to take a risk. Venture capital investment per capita is also very high. I think Israel ranks 2nd worldwide and 1st within the EMEA region. So that part of the culture seems very consistent with starting something here. But clearly also, if we're talking about Israel, we have to discuss Judaism. Not everybody, of course, has religious beliefs. People may be cultural Jews and not religious Jews, of course. So the effect is not necessarily that of the individual's beliefs. It may be that you're not a believer in the religion, but you're surrounded by the culture. And so obviously you have to deal with that. That can be supportive, or it could be the opposite. So does Judaism fit with biostasis? And I'll talk about why I call it biostasis rather than cryonics in just a moment. Well, I think there's around 3/4 of Israeli citizens identify as Jewish. But within that group, of course, I'm not going to tell you things you probably already know, but ultra-Orthodox seem to be a fairly small percentage, 12 or 13%. Then Orthodox religious around 10 to 11%. And then Masorti around 35 to 38%, depending on the source. And then secular, maybe 40 to 43%. So you've got a lot of secular people who won't have any direct religious objection. Although, as I'm going to argue, actually in Judaism, there should be no religious objection to this practice anyway. So except from, of course, the ultra-Orthodox may oppose it, or at least have no interest in biostasis. But I think for anybody else, it should be very compatible. So drawing on what I researched for my book, which is coming close to completion now, Orthodox Jewish thought values the preservation of life. And forgive me if I butcher the pronunciation, but I'm talking about the principle of pikuach nefesh, saving a soul or saving a life. It's a principle in Jewish law that the preservation of human life overrides virtually any other religious rule of Judaism. If life-extending technologies align with halakha, they should be acceptable and even encouraged. So that's a very good start. I can also give actually anecdotal evidence that for quite a few years, must have been like 15 years or so, when I was living in Southern California, every year, or maybe even twice a year, I was invited to the new Jewish Community High School to give a talk to an advanced class there by the biology teacher who was fascinated in the subject. And I found that the students were very intelligent compared to my normal students, asked a lot of good questions, and were quite receptive to the idea. Now, one obstacle could be, even under this principle of pikuach nefesh, one obstacle could be if the technologies are seen as disrupting the natural order. But of course, many technologies acceptable to Jews disrupt the natural order. So what that condition amounts to is not really very clear. Liberal Jewish movements might be quite open to radical life extension, viewing it as an extension of human responsibility to heal and improve the world, as embodied in the idea of tikkun olam, various forms of action intended to repair and improve the world. And if anything needs repairing and improving, it's the aging process and the inevitability of biological death. Now, curiously, there is one, actually, in America, very well-known Jewish intellectual, Leon Kass, who was formerly the president of the Council's Bioethics Commission set up by George Bush some years ago, who has very explicitly dealt with the topic of life extension and other related topics, and is very much against it. But he's also stated how frustrated he is that other Jews seem to be pro-radical life extension. So he's actually feeling quite isolated, which is a good sign from our point of view. There was a survey by the Pew organization that does a lot of surveys, all kinds of topics, on life extension a number of years ago. And there was a quote from Rabbi Eric Wisnia of the Reform Congregation Beth Chaim in Princeton Junction, New Jersey, who said that most Jewish thinkers are likely to embrace life extension. He said that prolonging life and saving life, no matter how long, is a great thing, and added that longer lives would allow people to better teach and serve future generations. Human beings are built for cumulative knowledge, and the older we are, supposedly, the more wise we are, he says. Of course, that's not a guarantee. Sometimes we manage to get older without getting any wisdom if we stick to our views and don't question them, but that should be the general tendency. And since Judaism is not a creedal religion, Jewish theologians might offer an opinion on life extension and therefore on cryonics, but would probably just show it as their personal opinion and not binding on other people. Another rabbi, Elliot N. Dorp, who's the distinguished professor of philosophy at the American Jewish University, wrote in a collection called, or his essay was called Becoming More Like God, A Jewish Perspective on Radical Life Extension, which was published in a little volume, which you might be interested in checking out, called Religion and the Implications of Radical Life Extension. Now he sees some challenges to life extension, such as the undermining of urgency. This is a common, and I think largely incorrect idea that if we have more time, we'll just put things off forever because there's no hurry. I think there's a lot of problems with that idea. But he's concerned about that, and also talks about the need to revise some practices such as age-specific education. But he really doesn't have any basic opposition to radical life extension, and therefore presumably to cryonics. So, okay, having acknowledged the cultural context here, I'm told that there may be some people watching this, maybe quite a few, who have little familiarity with cryonics and biostasis. So let me cover a few basics. I'm not sure if other speakers have covered all of this material, drawing on what I put in my book here. Now, by the way, the book I'm writing because there really isn't a book to give someone on cryonics these days. Of course, you can give them Robert Ettinger's book, The Prospect of Immortality, although I think that title is unfortunate, and we're not really talking about immortality here. And it's also as old as I am, 1964, so it really isn't current, and I can't think of another book that's really adequate. So that's why I'm writing this book. It's going to cover pretty much everything that needs to be covered: how biostasis and cryonics fits into emergency and resuscitation medicine, the evidence for effective preservation, why biostasis should be your longevity plan A, as I mentioned at the beginning, how to design organizations to last for a century or more, which may be necessary, repair, revival, rehabilitation issues, the philosophical issues of biostasis, sources of cultural resistance, and also what kind of world might we wake up in the future, which is really a big deal for many people. If you think the future world is going to be a terrible place, then really, why would you want to do this? So let me make a few basic points here, and I think it's important to understand things this way. First of all, I like to view cryonics or biostasis as an extension of emergency medicine. Now, it's important to frame it that way, and I've done that very much in my book. Through the first two chapters, basically, there's a lot of medical history there, showing how people have tried to revive people over time and the strange methods they use, and only finally in the last century becoming slightly more effective. But we've continually pushed back the boundaries of how far we can go before we revive someone and resuscitate them. And so really, if we frame it that way, what we see is today, when the doctors reach the limit of their medical technology and the tools they have today, they basically give up on you. They say, I'm going to declare this patient dead, which doesn't really mean anything very objective. It's basically just saying, I don't know what else to do for them. And in many cases, actually, they could revive the person again, but they may not do that either because the person has a do not resuscitate order or because it just seems pointless. They're just going to revive them for a few minutes, maybe of great discomfort or suffering. So it's kind of a little bit of a fuzzy boundary there, but they're going to say, I call you dead at this point. And what we're saying is, well, hold on a minute. You can't just throw the person away at this point. They're not really dead. They're dying. They're in a process of dying, but we can halt that process. And we can then, by halting that process and protecting the cells, we can take people into the future, decades from now, a century or more, when we'll have much more advanced technology that may be able to help the patient. So again, an extension of emergency medicine. We reached the limits of today's medicine, but we have this method, cryonics, of stopping the dying process, pausing it, and letting people hopefully benefit from much more advanced technology in the future. Now, I think there's three ideas that are really essential to understanding cryonics. I mean, there's a lot of different ideas, but three particularly core ones. The first point is to understand that true final irreversible death is different from clinical death or legal death. Now, clinical death is simply the cessation of heartbeat and respiration. And because in the old days, that was considered the same as death because they didn't know what to do about that. If your heart stopped beating, you stopped breathing, there was really nothing to be done. But over time, we did learn there are some things to do. And of course, now we have CPR, defibrillation, a number of different means of restarting, so on. So you can be clinically dead, but nobody really thinks that's the same as real final death these days. Similarly, legal death is simply, as is a legal definition, doesn't tell you anything about the biology. You could be legally dead and almost completely intact, just that something's not working, or you could be legally dead because the brain has been destroyed, which would be a very different situation. So we're not really interested in that, except from the point of view of practicality. But unfortunately, given the laws anywhere in the world right now, we actually have to wait until someone is declared legally dead before we can begin the procedure. And that's because some of the things we'll do early on could stop the heart, and that would be technically considered homicide. So we have the bizarre situation that our pets, Natasha and I, my wife, we have a dog who's cryopreserved, Oscar. He's there in the tank at Alcor, and he got a much better cryopreservation than most humans could expect because we were able to schedule it when he was very ill. We had a vet come in. He was anesthetized right then, but the process had already begun before he would be considered, on human terms, clinically dead. You can't do that with a human being, so it's very strange. But that's the core point, is true death is not the same thing. In fact, there is a term in cryonics that's quite popular, information theoretic death. Now, I won't try to explain that in detail, but it's basically the idea that you're not really dead until the structure of the brain that embodies your personality and your memories has deteriorated beyond the point that any conceivable technology could repair and revive it. So, there could be damage done that we can't repair by today's technology, but if the basic structure is still there or can be inferred from what remains, you can still reconstitute the person and the memories. So we have to be very careful about distinguishing a functional view of death, the body stopped functioning, from a structural view. So long as the structure is sufficiently well maintained, it doesn't matter if the function can't be restarted today. So the second core idea, so we've got the basic idea of death is not the same as clinical legal death. The second core idea is that deep cold can halt the dissolution of biological systems. Now, when you're above freezing, around every 10 degrees C reduction in temperature slows metabolism by 50%, which is known as the Q10 rule. So if you drop by 30 degrees Celsius, then it's going to be 2 times 2 times 2. So you're going to be down to 50%, 25%, 12.5%. So basically, the metabolic system is running at 1/8 the rate when you drop that temperature that far. And that buys you more time. There's less deterioration. That's critically important. And once we get colder than that, below freezing, then a different equation kicks in, the Arrhenius equation, which is and I'll try to set that out. It's quite complicated. But basically, it shows that the colder you go, then at an increasingly rapid rate, metabolism slows down. And once you get below about minus 120 degrees Celsius, once you pass the glass transition point, as it's called, where the frozen fluids basically, well, not frozen, hopefully, because we prevented the freezing, but extremely cold fluids will solidify and hold everything in place. And at that point, basically, the amount of time that you can wait then goes up drastically and is probably a lot longer than we'd expect our civilization to survive. It could be millennia. So 100 years is no problem at all at that point because there's just no change going on. So it's the power of deep cold to slow things down. And it does accelerate as you get colder and colder. The third idea I think that's really essential is that our current inability to revive cryopreserved people does not detract from the purpose of cryonics. Okay, claiming that we have a reasonable chance of reviving cryopreserved people in the future is kind of like in 1920 claiming that we would one day land someone on the moon. Now in 1920, we knew that achieving a moon landing violated no physical laws. There's nothing in physics, whether Newton's or Einstein's, that says that's not possible. It's not like traveling in time or more controversially, traveling faster than light. No physical laws are violated. However, in 1920, we would have no idea how to build sufficiently powerful rockets, guidance systems, life support systems, and so on. So it was quite reasonable back then to say, well, in principle, we should better reach the moon one day. I just have no idea how to do it. So the fact that we can't do it today is not at all an argument that it'll never be done. So along with those three core ideas, there are three facts which justify the practice of cryonics. So if you want to give someone a quick justification of why is this a reasonable thing to do, these are three main points. First of all, cells and organisms do not operate continuously, do not need to operate continuously to stay alive. Think about general anesthesia, therapeutic hypothermic circulatory arrest. Think about organ donation. If the person has been declared clinically and legally dead, that doesn't mean that, and things have stopped circulating, things have stopped functioning. That doesn't mean that the cells are all instantly dead. If that were the case, then we couldn't donate organs, obviously. If as soon as the doctor declared you to be dead, all the organs were dead in some important sense, then we couldn't give them. So clearly, most things are still alive, and memories in particular don't require continuous activity. So under anesthesia, for instance, when you wake up from that, you'll probably lose the short-term memories, the last few minutes, but every other memory will be intact. That's because short-term memories are based on electrochemical activity in the brain, whereas long-term memories produce physical changes in the connections between neurons and changes in the neural bodies. So lack of continuous operation is not necessary for survival. Now, secondly, the second justifying fact is that current cryopreservation techniques can preserve the fine structure of the brain. Now, at Alcor, and I know at Tomorrow Biostasis, CT scans have been done on a number of patients to see how well the perfusion process worked, how much ice was formed or how much was prevented. Now, that doesn't really tell us very much about the detailed level on where we need to know for memory and personality storage. For that, we have to look at electron micrographs or trace axons and dendrites. Now, I have a very long chapter on the science of this in my book. There's a lot of evidence that we can, in fact, preserve that structure in the brain, and we're getting better at doing that. If we couldn't do that, then obviously there'll be no point to the process. So it's not just that we think it might be possible, we actually have direct evidence that we can, in fact, do this. And finally, we can foresee feasible future repair technologies, technologies that are capable of biological repair and survival. Now, this might be some kind of advanced nanotechnology. It might be something we really haven't thought of yet. It's a matter of projecting the capabilities of medicine into the future. It should be pretty uncontroversial to say that technology progresses, and so long as something doesn't violate physical laws, it seems like that's one day we should be able to achieve that. So today it seems incredible that we could regenerate organs, repair spinal cords, and so on, but we're already beginning to do those things. So we're going to need some much more advanced technologies than we have today, but these seem to be things that should be happening at some point. So given enough time, technology will advance far enough to enable repair and revival. And the beautiful thing about cryopreservation, this is really a very strong factor here, is that it provides the time necessary for technology to advance. As I said earlier, once you're cryopreserved, you can wait. You can wait for a long, long time, and it doesn't make any difference. Except, of course, in terms of the longer you're there, then the more time for the organization possibly to fail or something like that to go wrong. But from a preservation point of view, it doesn't make any difference. So we have this, essentially the early parts of cryonics will be getting you into the state. We've got to do that pretty quickly. But once you're there, once you're cryopreserved, we can wait a long, long time and wait for that technology to catch up. So, okay, what advice can I give with you starting up very ambitiously in Israel Cryonics? And good job on that. I see on the website one of your stated goals is to establish the first Cryonics Institute in Israel. Well, very good. Good for you. I'm all in support of that, and hopefully we can give some useful advice. One thing I would say right away is that don't expect everybody to make this work equally. It's not going to happen. Now, hopefully you get a lot of people to pitch in. I know in the early days of Alcor, there's a lot more volunteerism, but you can expect one or two people are going to have to take the lead. You need someone who's really persistent and dedicated to make that happen. So don't think you can just sit back and expect other people to take over. Really, one or two people are going to have to push this ahead. Also, I would say right from the beginning, adopt excellent standards from the very start for standby stabilization and transport, for cryoprotective perfusion, and for storage. And at Biostasis Technologies, we can certainly help with that. We actually have a lot of experts in that area. My colleague Ashwin de Wolf actually wrote the book on cryonics procedures, so we certainly know plenty about that. Also on profits versus non-profits, generally the accepted wisdom has been that non-profit is the best structure for cryonics organizations, or at least for the patient storage part, because non-profits can have maybe a longer time frame. And actually, also, as I discuss in my book, if you look throughout the history at the longest lived organizations, they tend to be non-profit, educational, religious, other institutions. So that seems to be a good model for long-term survival. Now, the membership part and other aspects, even the SST part, might be run as a for-profit, but the storage part, you want to be non-profit. But beyond that, I would say, think very carefully about the structure of the governing board of your non-profit. At Alcor, I've had plenty of experience of a self-perpetuating board. Basically, the members don't elect the directors at Alcor, they elect themselves, and so the board tends to change pretty slowly over time. That has advantages and has disadvantages. The disadvantage of having a member-elected board is that the members may not really know what's going on. They may not be really competent to make those decisions because maybe they're not as involved. And also there is the possibility of being taken over by a hostile group, especially when the organization is really quite small. It doesn't take that many people to get in there and vote and basically change the whole purpose of the organization. So I would suggest thinking about a mixed board where you have perhaps, let's say, 4 directors that are self-perpetuating, where they vote for themselves, and 3 directors that are voted by the members. And also restrict the voting by members. It's, for instance, Cryonics Institute has a sensible rule. I'm not sure exactly what the period of time is, but you have to be a member for a certain number of years before you get to vote. I think it's 2 or 5, I'm not sure what it is. That's good because, again, that helps to block people from voting for something they really don't believe in, coming from the outside. Another thing I would say is don't oversell or overpromise. And I see that your website does avoid that, so good job on that. Now, just briefly, I want to stress the importance of SST, standby stabilization and transport. Actually, one thing I don't think I did, let me just briefly go back to talk about biostasis for a second. Why am I talking about biostasis more than cryonics? Well, first of all, biostasis includes cryonics. Biostasis, as the term suggests, is causing biological systems to stop changing, to be static. And cryonics, of course, is the most well-known way of doing that, using extreme cold. But you can also use chemical preservation or a combination of the two, which is a fairly new idea that we're exploring currently. So I like biostasis because cryonics just doesn't sound like a real word still to me somehow. It sounds a little bit made up. Biostasis sounds a bit more scientific, and I think it's preferable from that point of view. And it's actually been around for a long time. Eric Drexler, author of The Engines of Creation, the seminal book on nanotechnology from the mid-80s, used the term in his book. So it's not actually a new term. So as I mentioned, you need 1 or 2 people to lead. So we talked about that. Sorry. Importance of SST, that's what I was going to talk about. Yes. So SST is really crucial. There are some people in cryonics who think that they just can sign up with the organization, not need SST, just have a funeral director pick them up and deliver them at a leisurely pace to the cryonics organization. I would say that's really a bad idea. It may be that with a straight freeze, you can survive. Maybe the brain will be sufficiently well preserved, but you're going to do massive damage with ice formation. So you really want to have a standby. If at all possible, you want a team to get there quickly to remove the blood, replace it with a blood substitution solution, and then go on to the cryoprotection. You don't want to have a long delay at a warm temperature or very slow cooling. So good standby stabilization and transport is really crucial, and it's something that you should definitely focus on from the very beginning. Now, there are, of course, questions as to what if someone can't afford that? They just want the very basic freeze. Well, that's kind of an ethical question you have to decide. But I would say the default should be to have really good SST. Early on, as you're developing your group locally, a small local group consisting initially of cryonicists and their friends and family, you want to try and build up some very basic capabilities, things like beginning cooling of the patient. Maybe before a team can get there, before the full well-trained team can get there, local people can still, if they're allowed to with a hospital or if they're in a funeral home, begin external cooling. They may be able to administer some basic medications or to encourage doctors to do that. And they can be there to advocate on the patient's behalf at a medical facility. So those are kind of early things you can do even before you have a sophisticated organization. And there are groups doing this today, like, for instance, the Minnesota Cryonics Rapid Response Group in Minneapolis, the Futurist Club in Canada, and Cryonics UK in the United Kingdom. So in starting your own group, you want to connect with other people in your area who are willing to respond. You're going to want to procure some basic supplies, which is ice, limited medications, and perhaps dry ice, depending on what the situation is. And I don't know how easy it is to get dry ice in Israel. The US is kind of unusual, apparently, and it's quite easy to get here at grocery stores and so on. It may be a little harder to get. Another thing you can do is to attend some of the trainings that Biostasis Technologies does fairly regularly. And maybe you can also train with other organizations, possibly, ones that are working in Europe currently. It's really important to have regular trainings, and that's something that Tim Gibson at Cryonics UK does very well. Every 3 months, they do a regular training session. You won't have many cases early on, so having regular training is really important to keep your skills fresh. Now, how can we get Biostasis Technologies help? Well, apart from giving advice based on our history and experience, one of our recent projects is the Cryo Registry. Now, this is basically an online registration for people who want to build local capabilities. And I'm not sure what the current numbers are, but I know we are over 100 people already on the Cryo Registry. So I would suggest that you go to our website. You can find a link at the Substack blog, the Biostasis Times blog, and sign up for the Cryo Registry. That way you can, we'll probably have some meetings too, like Zoom meetings where people can discuss the challenges and how they've overcome them. So that's very encouraging, I think, to talk with other people who are facing the same challenges. At BT, we're also doing a lot of research and looking at how to make cryonics work better. So a very important thing, for instance, is liquid ventilation, which has been worked on for decades now. But I think finally it looks like there are probably 3 different versions of that in being worked on in various labs right now. But I think ours is pretty much ready to go, as I understand it. And the idea of liquid ventilation is to accelerate the cooling process much better than just packing the body in ice or even circulating icy water, which is a little bit better, but it's still very slow. The heat has to gradually leave the body. But the lungs have a huge surface area. If you could open them up, it would be like a football field or something, a very large surface area. And if you pump in chilled perfluorocarbons or some other fluid into the lungs, it can drop body temperature very rapidly, thereby avoiding the damage done at those room temperatures, the warm temperatures. Another area that's very promising is field cryoprotection. So normally, at least in a long distance case, when it's not somebody who's right near the cryonics organization, you have to send a team out there. You've got to do the blood washout, take them back to the organization, then remove that fluid again, and then replace with the cryoprotective perfusion to prevent ice formation. But there is a possibility, and this has been in quite a few times already, of doing the cryoprotective perfusion in the field, like local to the patient. That has the advantage that you've already dropped the temperature really low, and now you can go well below freezing without causing freezing while protecting the cell. So that can save, 12 hours or more of ischemic damage, like a blood flow damage. There's also the possibility of shipping patients on liquid nitrogen, which is something that's still being looked at. And as I mentioned earlier, at BT, we know a lot about procedures. Ashwin wrote the book on that. So we have a lot of standard procedures you can learn from and are freely available to learn from. And we're also working on standards. Eventually, we'd like to see some form of accreditation in the industry so that we have standards that organizations have to reach to be accredited, just like a university gets accredited by passing certain standards. That doesn't stop people from running organizations that don't reach those standards, but it does mean they don't get that stamp of approval, which hopefully will come to mean quite a lot. So there's so much more I could tell you, and I hope one day we can meet in person and talk about this further. But I want to congratulate you on your first steps in the organization. I'm proud of you doing that. I know it's not easy, and I urge you to reach out to others for help and support. And when you're ready, once you've got things a little more organized, you can make reciprocal agreements with other organizations for cases far from Israel. Because clearly you don't just stay in Israel all the time. Most of you are going to travel. So just like US organizations might make some kind of agreement with that in England or with the Swiss-German organization, that's something I need to look into. And finally, I suggest that you subscribe to the Biostasis Standards Substack blog to keep up with ideas and developments. Thank you very much.
To speaker number 5, I'd like to introduce Åke Brännström from the Swedish Cryonics Association in Sweden. Åke is a founding member of the Swedish Cryonics Association. He's also a Tomorrow Biostasis member and a signatory of the scientists' open letter on cryonics. Ake will talk to us today about his journey in cryonics, from first steps to founding Sweden's Cryonics Association. He will share his journey into cryonics from his first encounter with the idea to co-founding the Swedish Cryonics Association. He will discuss challenges and experiences of running a local cryonics organization and explore possible future directions. And this is very intriguing for me, particularly because we are exactly in that position right now in Israel where we're trying to establish this kind of service. So Ake, are you with us?
I'm here, yes.
So please, the floor is yours. Go ahead.
Thank you, Kfir. I can start by adding actually that I'm also a Cryonics Institute lifetime member, but I'm currently signed up with tomorrow Biostasis. Okay, so I will maybe try to present a little bit from a lighter perspective than the previous speakers, and maybe also more from a personal perspective, my journey in cryonics. Can you all see my slides now? Is it working properly?
Yes, absolutely. Yes, thank you.
Perfect, thank you. Right, so my interest in cryonics started roughly at the time when I started to study at the university in Umeå in northern Sweden. It was a time when the internet became widely available, and I read a lot about many different topics, cryonics among them. So a very interesting time when I learned a lot. I don't exactly remember how I came across cryonics, but I do remember that I read a lot on Usenet on life extension, and Ben Best, who later went on to become a director of Cryonics Institute, posted frequently at the time, so there might have been a connection there. I also remember that I read this novel that you can see on the slide, The First Immortal, and probably it had quite some effect on me. I mean, even to this day, I remember the storyline. The photo that you see is what it looks like in Umeå. So these are some student accommodations that you see in the background there. And most time of the year, we have a lot of snow. Right, then I went on to do a PhD in mathematics. And after that, I moved briefly to Japan, where I lived in Nara. And Nara is the city where the first emperor stayed. And a lot of Japanese culture originates from there. And you have this free walking deer that are quite famous in Nara. Nowadays, I heard it's pretty much overrun by tourists, so it's become very popular. But when I was there, it was really beautiful, a lot of things to see and so on. And it was also a time when I had actually both, well, I had a lot of time to myself, so I could think and do a lot of things that I had maybe planned for, and also resources. So as a postdoc, I earned a bit more than as a PhD student. And the future was looking bright, so I started to look into cryonics. And I explored Alcor and Cryonics Institute, and both, I think, seemed like very good options. Alcor at the time did not accept insurances, I think, in Swedish currency, and it was difficult for me to find something in US dollars. So for practical reasons, I ended up with Cryonics Institute. It's also, of course, more affordable. So I became a CI member, and then this was finalized about the time when I had actually returned from Japan and was living in Austria in Europe. And as you can imagine, in the beginning, this arrangement maybe wasn't so very good because I had no standby arrangement. So if something had happened, probably it might have been a straight freeze that Dennis was talking about more than anything else. But later on, in 2016, I joined Cryonics, I heard about Cryonics UK, then I joined Cryonics UK as a member to improve the chances that I could actually get some standby and better care if something were to happen. And 2016 was also the same year that the Swedish Cryonics Association was founded. And it's actually almost to this day, I think it was April 4, that we founded the association. And it happened so that one sort of well-known Swedish biohacker reached out to me about Cryonics, and I knew 2 other people who might also be interested in Cryonics, and we set up a Skype call. And the screenshot actually exists from this Skype call, and that's what you see on the lower part of the screen. So we discussed together, and during this discussion, we decided that we would form a local association in Sweden to promote cryonics. So that's now 9 years ago. What happened was that very quickly, all the other 3, they dropped out, and was pretty much only me. But then we had recruited some other members, so the association could continue also beyond that. Then if you go even further towards the present time, then in 2021, so 4 years ago, I joined Tomorrow Biostasis. And this was for 2 reasons. I mean, one, I wanted to support this initiative. I think it's great to have a European cryonics organization. And second, I felt and still feel that they have the best resources to provide standby for me where I'm currently living in northern Sweden. Yeah, so for that reason, I joined Tomorrow Biostasis. Okay, what is then the Swedish Cryonics Association? We are rather small. That's the first thing you may want to take home. It's about 12 members and 4 board members. So it's a very small association. We have 2 membership levels. A full member, which is about 100 euros or $100 US per year, or supporting members for 20 euros or $20 US per year, approximately. Currently, there is no difference between these 2, so it's more to what extent one wants to support the association. In the future, we intend that a full member can maybe receive first aid from the association. I think that was the plan, at least from the beginning. But right now, it's really 2 levels. You can choose at which level you want to support the organization. What do we do then? Well, we have a website with information about cryonics. It's in Swedish, but if you want to take a look at it, you can find it and I can send you the link. We have some questions and answers, contact information, a little bit about cryonics and so forth. So it's a resource for people interested in cryonics in Sweden. We have a Facebook page, which we use to mainly to disseminate maybe news and information and so on. We sometimes sponsor these Facebook posts when we have events, and that has been quite successful in the past. But we also get actually quite a number of questions through this Facebook page. People find it and then they send us a question using the messenger function. What we do, we inform currently about cryonics. That's maybe the largest activity, and part of that is also answering questions that come in. We have investigated the legal situation, and something we still do, and we organize meetings and talks. And if you look at it chronologically, then this is essentially what we have done in terms of events. So the very first one was kind of art exhibition. It says Man and Machine. So we were there with a presentation that was running on a screen that we put together, and we also produced folders that we handed out to interested people. Very soon thereafter, we organized a meetup in Stockholm for interested people. Later that year, 2017, we had a presentation and then dinner in Stockholm. And the year after, we repeated that concept, presentation followed by dinner. In 2019, we participated in an exhibition also in Stockholm, so it's very Stockholm-centric. As you can see, it's the capital of Sweden. In January, we had presentations and dinners again, and here for the first time, I think we had invited people from outside Sweden. So it was Ashwin de Wolf, Jappi Hoekstra, and Antti Peltonen. So we may have heard of. And in December that year, we had an online presentation and discussion with Emil about tomorrow biostasis and that initiative. And on the picture here, you can see a photo from the meeting we had in January there with Ashwin, Jappi, and Antti. I had the presentation before them. Okay, then it's 2021 and it was a pandemic, and then we had a virtual pub over Zoom for all members. Maybe it was quite limited attendance, but was fun nonetheless. In October 2021, we took the first step towards realizing some sort of first response capabilities. So we organized the Cryonics first response meeting in Gothenburg with Jappi Hoekstra and Ashwin de Wolf, who led the training. And on the right, you can see a photo from that event. In April, we participated online in the first Nordic Cryonics Forum, which was in Helsinki. And if I remember right, both Emil and Ashwin participated on site. In the summer that year, we had an online event where people could connect and ask us questions about Cryonics. And this actually had a reasonable attendance, and interested people showed up, which was fun. In August 2023, we organized an online meeting with people from Finland and Norway about collaboration within the Nordic region. And one sort of thing that happened shortly after this is that the Norwegian Cryonics Association was formed. So we discussed that to a large extent at the meeting, and then it was actually formed. And now it's a very viable organization with its own website and so on. And most recently, and this takes us very close to the present time, was just before Christmas here in November, we organized the Nordic Cryonics Convention in Stockholm. And then on the picture here, you can see one of the speakers, Daniel Walters from Alcor, who I even saw online earlier, giving a talk. So that was a great event. Looking then towards the future, we plan to increase the membership. I think that would be great. Strengthen the community of cryonicists in Sweden and the Nordic regions, and also very importantly, develop these first response capabilities, like Emil also highlighted in his talk. I think it's very important to have. All right, then challenges and advice. Very briefly, I think one of the main challenges that we have encountered is the difficulty to actually attract members. So as you saw, we had 12 members. That's tiny, I would say. By comparison, I'm also a member of several other organizations, and all of them have more members. give a specific example. I'm a sort of radio amateur or ham operator, and a local radio club has actually 6 times as many members as the national Cryonics Association in Sweden. So somehow it's very difficult to attract members, and Cryonics is not the subject that interests people. So it's not only a niche subject, like ham radio can be, but a niche subject, it seems. So that's a challenge to overcome, and I think part of it is that Cryonics is sometimes seen as weird, right? There's a stigma around it, as Dennis mentioned, or can be, as Dennis mentioned in his presentation. And I haven't found any, or we haven't found any good way around this. I hope that in time it will become more accepted and we can increase the membership, because having more members would really help. Connected to this, I mean, when there's a few, membership is so low, it becomes a high dependence on key individuals. I think for organizing events and so on, it has worked pretty well. We can always find someone who wants to organize an event, or yeah, it's always possible. But for this first response, it's a little bit more challenging. You need a commitment over time. It's not enough that you do it for a week or a month. You really need to stay in there for years. That's harder, right? So finding these key individuals become very important. I think there's also a risk of mission drift. I mean, to do these real things, like Cryonics first response, it's challenging, right? It's hard. It may be more fun and easier just to talk and do fun things. So there is a risk of mission drift, right? If one doesn't stay on target, then it could drift off in some direction, which doesn't lead to Cryonics first response, or doesn't go in the desired direction. So that's also something to bear in mind. All right, what advice would I give to a new organization? I think it's very important to put out the flag, right? To be seen, to have a website, to have maybe a Facebook page, so people can find you and contact you if they have questions. Then decide on a clear direction. I mean, what are you going to do? And write this down to try to reduce this risk of mission drift over time. It's also important to communicate with the members, otherwise they disappear and they don't want to pay for another year, perhaps. So somehow show the members that the association is doing something useful. And build this community so that the members feel part of the association. And in our case, we try to have at least one event with a dinner or something where people can come and actually socialize. So this also I think is important. On the right here, you see another photo from the convention we had in November. So this is the chair of the new Norwegian Cryonics Association presenting their plans for the future. And his name is Knut Åsbjørsen or something like that. Difficult to pronounce his Norwegian names. Yeah. Right. So with this, just wanted to show you what it looks like up here in the north of Sweden. This is a photo from early spring over the sea. All right. Thank you, and happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you so much. This has been fascinating. I learned a lot from you. And I wanted to ask you, given what Dennis said at the beginning of the evening about trying to find ways to garner resources through integration of, so to say, self-sustaining endeavors, so that like if we can use like technologies or approaches or harness certain resources that we already have in order to produce profit that would eventually be able to help us support this kind of initiative. I'm wondering if this is something that has crossed your mind, and if this is something that you consider doing in order to, to expand your reach and your scope, and you can do so much when you have the money. And that's one question. And the second question is, I'm wondering, in a previous conversation, you told me I think, if I'm not mistaken, that the Norwegian group had like a wealthy supporter that wanted this service for himself, and so he contributed a significant amount of money towards the establishment of the Norwegian infrastructure. And I'm wondering if you're still continuing to make any efforts in that particular direction.
Yes, thank you, Kfir. To answer this money question first, I think having money is always good. Question is how then, what one has to do to actually access such money streams. I think there's a risk that it might detract from the core mission of the organization if one strays too far away. I haven't specifically thought about Dennis' suggestion there. It's the first time I heard it, so would have to think about it a little bit more. But generally speaking, I think, of course, it's good to have an income stream for an organization. We are currently membership fees, so that gives a kind of constant income stream, and occasionally we get donations. I thought a little bit about the idea whether one could set up some sort of foundation that would sort of help cryopreserved individuals or look after them, a bit complementary to the patient care trusts that the existing organizations have. And maybe a small fraction of that could go to a Cryonics organization for managing the foundation, something like that, as an extra revenue stream, but it hasn't been implemented yet, and it's not sure if it's a good idea or not. So for the time being, I mean, money we get from memberships fees plus occasional donations. As to the second question, I think it's not Norway, right? It's the Netherlands probably that you are referring to.
Yes.
And it's Jappi Hoekstra, who has visited us at times, and he has this very fantastic custom-made ambulance that was on the picture. It was on one of the slides from Gothenburg. So he would, I mean, is apparently a very wealthy individual in the Netherlands who donated money to set up a foundation that Jappi now runs, and this is paid for the ambulance and probably also enabled this training that we held in Gothenburg. And if I can get something like that, of course, it's great. But I don't know if there's any recipe for actually bringing up such individuals. I mean, a general fundraising effort is probably good, and then maybe it happens.
Yeah. As you talk and, you shared about how you try to periodically get your members together and, do an ask question sessions and like periodical meetings and so on. So I'm thinking aloud and I'm saying to myself, maybe it would be inspiring and strengthening, for people all over to maybe hold a periodical international session in this sense, like members from Sweden and some of our initial members here from Israel, and maybe from other locations once every 2-3 months or so. So we can have a Q&A session, or maybe someone could share like stories of, their own efforts in the field of cryonics, and so that, we can inspire each other and help each other out in this sense. What do you think?
I think it's good. I mean, in general, I think it's good trying things, right? It's a good idea and we can try it. And if it doesn't work, then we just stop. It's more about someone doing it and sending out the invitation.
Absolutely. Guys, locally, do you have any questions for Ake? Anything that you'd like to remark or add? Yeah. Oh, yes. Ake, could you please share again the name of your organization? I'm also going to share all the information later, but maybe you could show the slide again. Is that possible?
It's absolutely possible. The name of the organization, I can also post in the chat actually a link to the webpage if you want. But let's show this Facebook page perhaps first. Here's the Swedish name, Svenska Kryonikföreningen.
I'm going to share all the information later to all interested parties. Yes,
I think it's just Google.
James,
can you after you show this slide, I was going to ask you, can you show the slide of the first immortal that you said influenced you? I'm gonna arrange something for you. I'm not going to tell you yet what it is, but that's I've got a fun thing for you on that front. And to your point, Kfir, Jeremy Wiggins is on this call. Jeremy is now working with Alcor as our international development coordinator. And so, Aka, to your point, you know, I know right now the volunteers, you guys have jobs, you have families, you're very busy, and it's not your full-time job by any stretch. But Jeremy has been hired by Alcor specifically to start organizing small groups throughout the world. And, you know, Jeremy, I think we could probably help host that, you know, quarterly kind of meeting for these small groups. That's a great idea, Kfir, that you mentioned that, because that will really bring together, you know, you guys have commonality, what I call commonalities of interest, in that you're all small groups, you know, you don't have a lot of funding. Alcor has been around 50 plus years. Like we ought to be present for you guys. We ought to be helping you develop. And that doesn't matter. Like if you're signed up with CI, you're signed up with Tomorrow, that's fine. I get it. I understand why you are. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't be helping you develop. Like Alcor can help you develop. It's good for everybody. And Jeremy's job is to do that. He's paid to do that. So he's waving. Happy to help.
Wonderful.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Ake, thank you, James. And Ake, thank you so much for sharing everything. This has been fascinating. I really appreciate it. I'd like to, with your permission, move on to, you know what, before I move on to the last speaker, I'd like to ask again if Max Moore is with us. Has Max joined the conversation? No? Not yet? Okay. So I'll tell you what, in exchange for Max, since James introduced him, then maybe Jeremy would like to say a few words. Is that possible?
Sure, you're putting me on the spot there.
Just
tell where you're from.
Whatever is comfortable for you.
Sure. So I'm from Canada. I currently live in a small town outside of Ottawa. Frequently go to Ottawa. We have our Canadian headquarters there. We're like we've worked in the past year to make our organization like a truly legitimate one. So we're actually a nonprofit Canadian company that is affiliated with Alcor US. And so Alcor Canada has a mandate to organize and sponsor research in cryonics. That is our main focus. And so we're 3 board members. So Vinny, who's on the call, and Jean-François, and both Jean-François and myself are French Canadian. And Vinny, he is Brazilian, so he has some Portuguese in his background. So between the 3 of us, we are the decision-making people about how the organization pivots. And of course, like we have monthly meetings, and we always have the US board with us. So James and Shelby, Sarah, and the rest of the organization. So we meet every month. We talk about issues that are concerning Canada, but at the same time, it's an open platform, and we often navigate to international issues. And so what I've been doing in the past year or the past 8 months in my role, I've been trying to meet up with different organizations throughout the world and trying to make conglomerate them and make them into one. So right now, like I have people in France, I have people in Germany, talking with people in Mexico, talking to people throughout Canada, and trying to just make a whole out of all of the different societies, all the different associations that have, make themselves little hubs here and there, and just make the world a little bit smaller. And so I do appreciate the idea very much to make a meeting where everybody who has like these little representations of their countries or their areas to meet together and to unify and have a common voice and to be able to talk and communicate the issues, because everybody's living the same issue. We're all living a little bit far away. We have a centralized model for preservation and decentralized model for how to get the body there. So it makes it a challenge for everybody. And we all know the different challenges in cryopreservation and time, and how it's so important to be at your patient's bedside when they pass away. But everybody has a different view of those challenges, and every country is a little bit different. So in my role, I'm trying to learn all the different facets and all the different laws that are encompassing the different countries. So I'm truly learning a whole lot about a lot of countries and how things are so complicated, from the preservation side to funeral home side to life insurance. It just everything is so complex and so different in every country. And so I think it's really worthwhile to be able to speak to everybody at the same time and say, hey, what are the challenges that you've encountered? And what are the challenges that I've encountered? And actually, I found this solution and might be actually useful for you to be able to work with. And maybe you have a solution for something that I have not been able to figure out yet. And to be able to have that contribution internationally and to help each other, I think it's a worthwhile project for sure.
Jeremy, I wanted to ask you something. If we look at the past, I don't know, 100, 150 years, we've seen a lot of turmoil all throughout the world, Europe, US, like war and all kinds of crises, and now the climate is going crazy, and all kinds of challenges that this planet of ours is facing. And I'm wondering, through your ventures, to Canada and soon maybe to Sweden, and as far as your decision-making process in Alcor on where to locate new storage facilities, there's always the fear that of the unpredictable. I mean, think about how long it might take for humanity to be able to develop the technology to reanimate a preserved person. It could be 100 and 200 years into the future. And I'm wondering if you guys have given serious thought to what would happen if the unforeseen takes place, like a crazy earthquake, or, I don't know, nuclear war, or crazy climate change issues, or military occupations, or whatnot. Is there like a clear strategy that allows you to plan ahead decades into the future as to what you will do in each contingency?
That's a very difficult questions I find to answer. Nobody can predict the future, but we do our best to try and plan the right place for the preservation of our patients. Like when Alcor decided to go to Arizona, they have a really nice spot there because as far as weather-wise, earthquakes, they're not it's not an area where it's been affected really about like earthquakes, and as far as geopolitical, it seems like it's a very safe place. And I've been to Arizona many times, and I've walked the streets. I have no problem saying that it's a very safe place where where Alcor has established their headquarters there. And then when you think of like environmental and climate change, I think the places for me where I feel like they would be the safest is kind of like the Nordic countries. So I think Sweden is a very intelligent place where we're having our thoughts going towards like future preservation there, because they are probably less likely to have I feel, I mean, I don't have evidence to back this up, but my feeling is that having Nordic countries where, they're going away from the equator, I feel like the equator is going to be the area where it's going to be affected the most by the increase in temperature in the Earth. So, my gut feeling is that Sweden is a really good place, and plus the way it's positioned geographically in Europe, it's kind of like in the middle and center to Europe. So it seems like when it comes to flights, it should be the logistically easier option for us to have. But
Wonderful.
honestly, I'm having trouble like completing your question because it's such we don't know where the Earth is going to go in 100 years from now, and we do our best to plan our like strategically to plan our headquarters, but I can't really answer that because who knows what's going to happen in 100 years from now.
I'll chime in a little bit. I did study history and politics and things. And one of the reasons, aside from geography and environmental conditions, which, by the way, we looked at like Portugal. Portugal has a lot of seismic activity. It has a lot of background radiation, and Emil and I may disagree on the relevancy of that. But the point of it is Sweden, for those who don't know on the history side, I think the last major war type situation in Sweden was the 1500s amongst Nordic countries, because Finland creates an almost impassable border to Russia. The Finns have always put up a hell of a fight. So looking at geopolitical threats, that was all examined. I think people would be really surprised about the checklist of things that we go through to explore this now that we're actively doing it, meaning we had to be at a place financially where Alcor could seriously consider remote cryopreservation storage. So if something happened in Arizona, ultimately, I want to have places that we can quickly pivot to move our patients quickly. And to do that, you also need the logistics teams that are capable of doing that. That's not volunteers with an ambulance. That's military level stuff. And that is precisely why I've brought in the best logistics planners in the world in terms of special forces training and stuff, because I like to start with the end in mind. So I'm starting with the expertise to achieve this endpoint that I know all of us, whatever Cryonics organization, we all ought to be striving for, which is mobility quickly in the event one location becomes unsustainable. Okay. That means we need to have at least probably in the world, probably 4 or 5 long-term storage components. But what folks don't understand is you also have to have accessibility to infrastructure. So there are a lot of people who come to me and propose that we put it in the mountain in the middle of, many hours away from anywhere. Well, very typically big cities might be targets in warfare, but you need to have proximity to that big city to get things like liquid nitrogen quickly, to get engineering expertise. People don't want to live in the middle of a mountain, right? And you need caretakers and you need engineers. So you actually have to consider environment first and then geopolitical in terms of transportation hubs that aren't going to be traditionally or historically targets. In Sweden, almost everybody likes the Swedes for the most part. They don't piss off a bunch of people, generally speaking, and they don't have earthquakes. And of course, we don't care about the cold. And if it warms 10 degrees in Sweden, it'll be about perfect. So, so those were things that I actually spent about 1.5 years. And Jeremy and Daniel, Daniel went out there. Jeremy, did you go out to Sweden? Yeah, I thought you did. So I'm literally sending people out. I went out. In this, none of this was haphazard, even if it appears to be. There was a huge amount of calculus that goes into this stuff. And Alcor has some of the world's top scientists. You guys don't know it because they're not public, they're confidential. But we in our membership, and not just membership, but consultants, have world-class people. And, I'm not the smartest guy. These people are, and I'm bringing them in, and they're taking it seriously, and they're evaluating these variables. And so that's how the process has gone, even though you folks don't see that process.
This is very, very interesting. Thank you so much, James, for chiming in, and thank you, Jeremy, for your talk. Unnoticed, I know, but I appreciate it. I'm going to move on to our last speaker. I'd like to introduce you to Rabbi Or Shraga here in Tel Aviv in our hall right now. Rabbi Shraga is a distinguished Israeli rabbi. He's a member of the Phoenix Cryonics Association that we established, and also an expert in Halachic burial. He will talk to us today about cryonics in the prism of Jewish law. Please. Would you like me to load your presentation? Okay, just 1 second. Let me make this happen. I'm going to share that. Okay. All right, we are seeing it. Let's go to slide, play, and minimize. Wonderful. You go 1 second. You go with the, yeah, arrows. Okay, please.
Thank you, Kfir. Hello, everyone. My name is Or Shraga. I'm certificate rabbi by the Chief Rabbanut of Israel and also serve as the rabbi of Vetek Association here in Israel. A few years ago, I was asked by Dr. Ilya Stambler and others, what is the Jewish opinion about the cryonics preservation? So I set up a meeting with the Alcor Institute. I flew to Scottsdale, Arizona. They gave me a private tour. They were really nice. They answered all my questions. And after that, I wrote about cryonics. So before I'm gonna talk about cryonics preservation, let's talk about burial in general. So I hope there isn't any serial killer with us today, and I'm giving him new ideas. But I found 12 ways to get rid of a body. Yes, you can burn the body. You can throw it to the ocean, for example. I mean, I want to say that it's not obvious what we know these days, what to do with that body, right? You can do nothing. You can leave it on the living room with your family, like as some tribes do in Indonesia. And you have other ideas. Okay, so let's talk about the Jewish burial. Let's start from the Mishnah period, let's say like 2,000 years ago. In the beginning, it was 2 stages of burial, right? They used to take the body and put them in the caves. And after the flesh was gone, they will collect the bones and put them into, let's say, ossuary or some box, and put them together with the family. Burial with in 2 stages. You can see the photo. It was like a yard and bunch of niche into the wall under the ground. And then after the flesh was gone, they would collect the bones and take it home or somewhere else. Okay, so where is the source of burial obligation? In the script, it was in Dvarim, if someone committed sentence to death, so they will kill him, and it's wrote that should not put him hang him on the pole, but you shall not leave his body on the pole overnight. Rather, you shall bury him on the same day, etc. And then, so this is talking about someone that's sentenced to death. But what about the general public, right? So the Gemara Sanhedrin, it says like this: ask Rabbi Yochanan, from where in the Torah is there a hint for the mitzvah of burial? So he answered that the verse states, "But you shall bury him," kavortik berenu in Hebrew, doubling the verb for emphasis that you should bury him. And after that, the Gemara tells us a story about King Shapur, the monarch of Persia. Once said to Rav Chana, he asked him, from where in the Torah is there a hint to the mitzvah of burial? Rav Chana didn't answer him what is the source. And then the Gemara continue, what is the reason of the burial? And after we know what is the reason of burial, we can understand what are the differences that arises from those reasons. So reason number one, the Gemara debating about burial, it's rather it's from because of a count of disgrace, right? Or an account of atonement. Okay, the interpretation of disgrace is large, but let's say disgrace from the dead body in front of us, disgrace to the family, right? And atonement, it's for the person, for his soul, right? The Gemara didn't answer what is the reason and keep it an open question. And the difference is, if this someone say, I don't want you to bury me, if it's because of the reason of disgrace, nobody asking you, is disgrace of your family and the environment. So they're gonna bury you by force. But if it's the reason is because atonement, so this guy is telling us that he don't want an atonement. So he didn't want an atonement, so we're not gonna bury him by force. He doesn't want it. Okay, so after we saw there was two stages in burial back in the day, let's talk about the sequences of the events. Everybody knows the verse of Genesis, for dust you are, and the dust you will return, כי עפר אתה ואל עפר תשוב. And from there we found in the Talmud Yerushalmi, Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi commanded before his death, do not multiply shrouds for me and let my coffin be buried in the earth. In Hebrew, it's תהא ארוני נקופה לארץ. It's important because the interpretation of this is important. Okay, so the first source we found in Judaism that speaks about the connection between burial and dust and soil and ground, it's Rav Natronai Gaon. Rav Natronai Gaon was asked the question about the correct way to bury a person. Should he be thrown into cave niche and slab placed above him niche so that no dirt or murder will touch his face? Or should he be covered with dirt as we do, like we do these days? And he replied, his answer not that clear. In the beginning, he want to say it's disgrace to put dirt on his face. But in the bottom line, this is the first source that we found that he say, and what they put dirt on because its cure is dirt. It is right, and then it says, thus you are, and thus you should return. Yeah, so this is the first source that connecting between this verse in Genesis to the way we know today that put him to connect between dead body and burial and dust. Okay, from there, the halacha was rolling. The Ramban, Rabbi Moshe ben Nachman, he take the story about Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi that commanded his sons before he died, do not multiply shrouds and bury my coffin buried in the ground. And he explained, meaning the spread, the lower the leaf in the coffin and lay it on the ground, right? That the body need to be attached to the ground. From there, the Shulchan Aruch, the canon book of the Halacha, Rabbi Yosef Karo, the one who gave the body to someone who died in a coffin and did not bury them in the ground, committed a transaction. And if the body was given in coffin and buried in the ground, it is not a transact upon him, but in any case, it's proper to bury them in the ground, even abroad, not just in Israel. right? So from there, it's what we know these days, that what we watch, that they throwing the body to the grave and covering him with sand. Okay. From there, we can watch another rabbis that speak about this statement, right? For example, we see Rabbi Shabtai Cohen explaining the meaning, the Shulchan Aruch, that even though the coffin buried in the ground, the coffin would not be closed all sides. Yes, like only the below shelf should be removed. So it should be a coffin, but because we don't want to spell on him directly the scent, but it need to be like some source of attachment to the ground. Also, we find, for example, Rabbi Mordechai Yafe, that he said exactly what is writing before, that to cover him, that is customary to cover the coffin with the sheet and not put any dirt on his body because it's a disgrace to him. Right. Also, for example, it brings the priests, the Kohanim, in this time that was buried in coffin completely, right, without any attached to the ground. Okay, I will ask two questions that will clear more about what I want to say. The first question is, why does the Talmud, when he asks in Well Will Reign about the burial, not cite the verse from Genesis, right, as the source? For thus you are, and to thus you will return. That's the first question. If it's so obvious, if it's so simple. And the answer to that, and that's the answer you should give to the public, but this is the truth, because this verse speaks about states of aggregation. God supposedly created a man from the material called dust, and will return to his former state of aggregation, which is dust. But this verse not speak about the weight of burial. The second question, if the way to bury the person is to bury him completely under the ground, why Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi need to command his sons to do so? Right? If this is the way that custom in his time. The answer is that I found in the Midrash Rabbah extended to this Yerushalmi, with Rabbi Yehuda commanded that his coffin be anchored to the ground because of the flood. Yes, it's explained that the reason that Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi asked this because he afraid that his coffin will flash with this disaster and it's gonna be disgrace. But he didn't want to say that his body need to be attached to the ground or touch the dirt, the dust. Okay, let's talk about presidents. For example, Mami, Rabbi David ben Zimra, which was a rabbi that lived in Egypt. According to him, State of Israel brought abroad a Jewish Ethiopian that he considered him as a Jewish. He was a really important rabbi. He asked about Jacob and Joseph, right? That they've been in Egypt and became a mummy. They bombing them. If it's we allowed to do so. This answer to us two problems in Cryonics. One of the problem is the disgrace of the body when you do a procedure, right? On the dead body, you do a procedure. So he says, as long is for his honor of the dead and for his benefit, so you can do so, as we saw in Jacob and Joseph. And also we can see that okay, we'll talk about later. Another precedent we found in the Talmud Baba Metzia about Rabbi Lazar that say to his mother, do not to his wife, do not bury me, rather put me on the attic, because he didn't want to bury it from his reasons. And so from these two precedents, we can see that there's options that burial is not mandatory, even burial as we know today. Okay, so we talked about in general burial, but if you're gonna see in the different Cryonics Institute, you can see that they put several persons in the same container. First of all, also they put upside down the body from their reasons, and there's a small metal wall that separate the bodies in the containers. I don't remember if it was 4 or 6. These secondary problems, for example, so we talk about the procedure itself. If it can be done, we say that yes. The distance between the burials. Also, we can say that the wall is like considered as a distance. Burial of a donkey, you can't bury in the lay down position or upside down, like in standing. You need to have like put it in like a horizontal. Thank you. And the problem that you cannot bury a righteous person with wicked one. Okay. Okay, let's jump to the conclusion. Ilya like conclusions. Why can't cryonic preservation be a substitute for burial, or at least there's no obstacle to doing so? First, some methods consider burial only as the Rabbanan, not from the script. So according to them, if someone asks not to be buried, they go to the Kula and we not gonna bury him. Second, even if we take the methods that consider burial as a disgrace, which means when person told you that you want not to want to be buried, you're gonna bury him anyway, then there's no disgrace in cryonic preservation, since it is preserved, buried and covered, right? And his body does not decompose in front of us. And there's no fear that the body will be desecrated or moved by wild animals, for example, right? And we also found precedents for this. Third, even to the methods that disallow burial in coffin without burial in the ground, here the container is connected to the ground, right? And it can be resembles as a built tomb. And container itself is inside a room that can be defined as the burial area. Okay. Fourth, we talk about the matter of the dirt that is just the int and not mandatory. This is very important because the rabbi these days says it's mandatory and we doesn't gonna have atonement. No, it's just a hint. It's not mandatory. And if you want to do so, you can do like what other rabbi says, to put clay on his eyes before the burial itself, and that's fine. Right, we can improve if we want to do cryonics here in Israel according to the Jewish halacha. We need to do some changes, but small changes, but nothing should be in there to this. 6, cryonics preservation is done in the hope that one day we will able bring the dead back to life. This significant reinforcement of belief in the resurrection of the dead in Judaism And if I want you to take something from my presentation tonight, it's not my pretty face, it's this sentence. Judaism not only does not give up on life, it is also not willing to give up on the dead. The Talmud states that the dead who are resurrected will rise with their clothes on. And indeed, the various Cryonic centers, for example, Alcor, allow to storage the clothes and the various belongings of the deceased. Wonderful. Yeah, if you want to read my full article, you can search on Google Cryonics in Halacha. Thanks for listening. In our full contact and the tour in Alcor that I took video on it, you can watch in my page, Be Death. You're also welcome to join us in the WhatsApp group, TikTok, Instagram, whatever. If you want to connect me, you can send me a message in my Facebook page or Shraga. Thank you.
Thank you very much, all, for this fascinating presentation. I appreciate it. Thank you. Yes, of course, definitely. Do anyone has a question? Ilya, please.
Okay. Thank you very much, Rabbi Shraga. That's, I believe it's a very important work you are doing, bringing people closer, everybody, religious and non-religious, to the idea of life extension, generally to the idea of cryonics in particular. The last point about the entrenched belief in Judaism in the resurrection, the revival of the dead, it's very entrenched. It's one of the articles of faith of Maimonides. We want to go too deep into this, but it's very deeply in the Jewish faith, altogether with the pro-life, pro-longevity ideology of Judaism. But in this regard, I want to ask a practical question. If you want a kind of a marketing technique for cryonics in Israel, we know that religious people are ready to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars to be buried on Mount of Olive, the Har HaZeitim. Why? Because their belief is that that will be the first place where the resurrection will start. And Jews are ready to pay good money to have a chance for resurrection as early as possible, before everybody else. So my question is, do you think it will work to try to establish a cryonic center in the Mount of Olives in Har HaZeitim? Because of course the resurrection will be done by the will of God, but through technology. And in other instances, it's okay with Judaism that something is done by the will of God, but through technology, through human agency. Do you think this logic will work in this case too, or not? And if not, why not? What's the obstacle for people to accepting this this strategy?
Thank you, Ilya. So the answer is no, which means I don't think we can convince even one religious guy that Crayon is going to be his next burial. This presentation only, I made it because for the general public, that if there's obstacle, we need okay, Crayon's preservation can be as a burial, and it's not a problem to do so. It's funny because I opened a group, a Facebook group for Ask Rabbi. We can ask Rabbi a question. Immediately I got 10,000 followers without even $1 advertising. In the Beat Death thing, in the Cryonics and stuff, people they don't want to hear about their death, right? So it's very, very hard to market it. Yeah, unfortunately.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Any other questions here? No? Anyone from the Zoom call would like to ask Rabbi Shraga a question? James, please.
Well, I mean, if you look, yeah, I did. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, perfectly. Thank you. Yes.
Okay, great. You know, we Alcor has, I think, at least 3 or 4 people on this call. And part of that is to demonstrate how serious we take the cultural issues that we want to respect. And somebody had brought up, Alcor has a neuro procedure, which would clearly contradict some of the Jewish customs and requirements. I thought a lot about this issue in terms of what you mentioned in your presentation about disgrace of the corpse or disgrace of the body. And when we cryopreserve somebody, we have a team, of course, of really highly qualified people. We make a point of showing absolute respect to our member patients who donate their bodies to Alcor. Is that a factor in terms of, to me, 24 hours security in a very controlled environment with a staff that's maintaining it and a caretaker? Is that a point we ought to emphasize culturally, that not only is there not disrespect, but there's kind of this highest level of respect being shown for somebody's corpse, or if you believe that there's viability, perhaps it's not even a corpse in that sense. Like what else could we do as an organization to show respect for the Jewish customs, I guess, in the sense of the actual operational side?
Okay. I think it's not just about Judaism. I think it's all about the religious, like to do a decent burial, right? I don't think like the family can fly to the Scottsdale, everybody, and make like a decent burial. If you can make like some ceremony, it doesn't matter if it's a Jewish ceremony or a Christian ceremony, but sort of ceremony, I think it would be better and easier to the religious family to accept that.
That's very helpful. And in fact, we have accommodated some other religious belief systems where they did do a ceremony at the body right before our team did the cryonic preservation process. And we allowed for that flexibility. We cool the body and then allow them to do their cultural or religious ceremony. And we'll take that under consideration as we look to open in Israel, changing the operation in terms of the process to allow some respect in the ceremony, as you put it. And of course, we're consulting with rabbis. I'm meeting with a preeminent legal Jewish scholar on the issue of death, actually this afternoon, ironically, completely randomly. It wasn't because of the conference today, but she's a law professor, and specifically on Jewish customs related to death. And so I'm meeting with her this afternoon so that we can start creating an operation process that respects those needs.
Thank you, James. Thank you very much. Thank you all, Shraga, for your very enlightening talk.
I had a question, Rabbi, if that's okay.
Yes.
I had a question too, if that's
Yes,
okay.
please, Jeremy. Yes.
Yeah, Rabbi, we often go to hospitals that are very opinionated on religion, and I was wondering if you've ever had a debate with other rabbis on the validity of cryonics, and what kind of argument wins when you discuss with them.
1 second.
I mentioned some of the problems in my presentation. For example, the cost, like the differences between the rich and poor. Some of them brought this argument, and also what they call mandatory, that it should be burned in the ground, in the dirt, connect to the dirt. So anything else is not considered as a burial. But if we go back in the time, we can observe that other Jewish cultures through history, they doing it in different way. Whether it's in coffin, whether it's in caves. But I think if back in the day they got the cryonics preservation, some of the rabbi will allow it, because as I said, it's protected. There's no disgrace, so it's not should be any problem. But to convince religious people these days, impossible.
Do you think that us looking into, for instance, the cave? I mean, we actively mentioned that we're looking into long-term storage in a cave. Would that help alleviate some of the burial custom issues?
Yes, a little bit.
That helps, right?
I want to ask you when you mentioned that, I want to say something about that, but yeah. it's gonna be better. Yeah, for sure. Because it's under the ground, right? But even
Yeah,
I
it's
think that even
deeply
that
under the ground.
even if it's up the ground, it's still connected to the ground, right? These
Yeah,
days in Israel, we don't have a place to bury it into the ground, so they're doing in like buildings and exactly. So it's basically the same. But they put like some dirt below the deceased. Yep.
Rabbi Shraga, could I have a question?
I'm sorry, Eugene, right?
Yes.
Please go ahead.
My question is regarding difference between full body cryopreservation and so-called neuro or cephalopreservation. As far as I understand, Judaism would allow only full body cryopreservation. And, I was contacting Alcor in the past, and I did not go through because I'm very concerned about their procedure that they prefer, basically, neuropreservation, cephalopreservation, and I would go only for full body. So could you please comment on this?
That's correct. There is option to only put the brain in preservation, but in Judaism you need to bury it or everything. Like even if you find hand or even blood, some of the you take the blood out and you put your material inside, also should be buried. So yeah, if as a Jewish person, okay, but Jewish have money, no, so they can do like full body, no problem.
Thank you again, Rabbi Shraga, and thank you. If no one else has any questions, I'd like to thank everyone who attended here this evening in this hall. This has been fascinating, and I really appreciate your patience and you sticking around for almost 3 hours. It's not self-evident in today's TikTok and WhatsApp life that people would have the patience to stick around and listen and really communicate over time. And thank you everybody that participated on Zoom and all the speakers that took part in this conference today. When I reached out to each and every one of you in hope that you would be willing to, to dedicate 20 minutes to this conference and to talk about yourselves and about your work, it was not at all self-evident that all of you would agree and really take part and dedicate your time and energy into this.